So today we're going to be continuing to take a look at a scenario where civilization starts over. We are now on episode 35 of this series. That is a lot of episodes, but we are here and it is going as good as ever, and I'm very happy to say that because I love this series and it seems that you guys love this series as well. And in the last civilization video, we saw the beginning of an emergence of a tripolar system between Russia, the old empire, and China. Now, if you don't know what that means, basically is that these three superpowers at this point. Now, in terms of the time frame, we're looking at like the 1950s right now, maybe getting into the early 1960s, but there are three superpowers in this world: the old empire, Russia, and China. Now, what does it mean to be a superpower? They all rank top 3 in rankings in the world that considers economy, military, stability, all that stuff. But being a superpower also warrants that you have nuclear weapons, and we're going to be getting into that a lot more in this episode. Some other stuff we saw happen in the last episode: we saw the African Union start to experience a lot of instability within. We saw a quick war in Japan to where now there are only 2 countries occupying the main isle, and to be honest with you, I don't remember what else. But that's okay because we're focusing in on this episode, so if you do enjoy it, please make sure to show some support by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel if you're new. Anyway, to start off this episode, we're actually going to be going up north to Russia. Now, Russia is a country that has kind of really come a long way in this series. They started out as kind of like this glorified, kind of safe space for Eastern Europeans. That eventually changed into what is now Russia, who is an imperialist country who is now, going back over to Eastern Europe and invading the territories from which their people once fled from. It's the 3rd strongest country in the world and is a member of the Square Alliance with the Old Empire and many others. But that's changing in Russia. Separation between them and the Old Empire is growing. They are no longer considered like close allies. They are in the same alliance still, but they're not really close allies. They are rivals, and they're very close to kind of splitting apart. And one of the big reasons for that is the secretiveness of the old empire and their nuclear program. As we know, the Brown team has nukes. They've been testing them on Iceland, which caused a little ice age, but now they have started to test them on their islands over here in the South Pacific Ocean, and they're almost to the point where they can weaponize them. The Brown team at this point is not a superpower. They're not within the top 5-ish, and that's kind of worrying for the other, top countries in the world, that a country that's under them is becoming more technologically advanced than they are. So the old empire infiltrated their nuclear program and started developing their own nukes, and they are very close to also going ahead and weaponizing them. They've been testing them in the Egyptian desert, in the Saudi desert, and they're having a lot of success with it. But they're not sharing this technology with the Russians, and the Russians were of course offended by this because, hey, we were allies. I thought we were allies, but the old empire, they kind of know the dangers of sharing nuclear information, how that could easily get out of hand and, go to some other, maybe even a rogue country. There really aren't any rogue countries, but, maybe one of their enemies gets a hold of it. You don't want that to happen. So they kept that information to themselves. Russia took offense to that, and now they are wanting to make their own nuclear program, but they can't do it from the old empire. So now what Russia has been doing is they have been infiltrating both the Brown team and the old empire's nuclear programs, and the old empire found out. And what does the old empire do once they find out that Russia has spies in their country, stealing their technology? They're going to kick them out of the Square Team Alliance. And this will officially start the Cold War. That's right. Welcome to the Cold War era of the Civilization series. It's going to be a crazy one. The Cold War in real life was probably as close as the human race has ever really gotten to extinction. That might not be true. But terms and politically, yes, that's true because, the nuclear war between the US and Russia was very close during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So with that in mind, I want to inform you guys that this Cold War is going to be even crazier than that. But it started the Russians versus the old Empyreans. The old empire wants to protect Eastern Europe from Russia's expansion, and Russia wants to become a nuclear power. Why do they want nukes? Well, the whole point of nukes is having them so you don't have to use them. If your enemy has nukes and you have nukes, there's kind of that mutual kind of like, it's called mutual ensured destruction, basically saying, hey, if you launch nukes at me, I'm going to launch nukes at you, and we're going to destroy each other, so let's not do that. But also, having nukes in general just isn't a good thing for the world. If nobody has nukes, then you don't have to worry about that. But the Brown team went ahead and developed nukes anyway, so now we have to worry about that. So Russia has the information they need to start developing their own nuclear bombs, and of course, they have a lot of area to test them in. But they're not there just yet. They're still developing them. They're not testing them, whereas the Brown team in the old empire is. But now that Russia has been kicked out of the Square Alliance, they want to go ahead and kind of flex their muscles a little bit, saying, hey, that was a mistake, and we're not going to stand for it. So they're going to send their armies up north to the border of Finland. Finland. Now Finland, this country has been here for a while, and like many other countries on this map, it hasn't done much. And unfortunately, even if you are the most neutral country in the world, you're not safe from some of these countries. Russia goes over to the leader of Finland and they're like, hey, we're going to take your southern ports and your southern coast because we want warm water access, or I guess better warm water access to the Baltic Sea. Finland looks at them like they're crazy. Understandably so, because hey, you just invaded this country, you have all this Baltic, coast right here. Why do you need our coast? How does Russia respond to that very simple to answer question? Well, they just send troops across the border. Russian troops will start to advance into Finnish territory, taking over 3 southern provinces in the matter of a few days. And the Finns will start to mobilize their armies in hopes of defending against Russia, although this country isn't notoriously strong militarily, so they might be in a little bit of trouble. Now Russian troops enter in from another part, going over here, and marching right towards the capital of Finland, but at this point, Finland's armies have mobilized and they are starting to defend against the Russians. And after a few weeks, this is what our war is looking like. So how is the world reacting to Russia's invasion of Finland? Well, remember, there is no UN at this point, and I don't know if there ever will be a UN. The UN was created in the aftermath of World War II to kind of prevent such a large-scale war from ever happening again, but that thought never came into mind of the winning team, which once again was the square team in World War II, so the UN was never created. There is kind of like a high level of cooperation in the international system, but it does not mean that there's a high level of trust. But my main point is that the world doesn't really react to this because they don't really care. There's no principle or standard that every country lives by, so Russia invading Finland is just like, oh, there goes another country, I guess. Now, of course, countries like Norway, who are friendly with Finland, are going to go like, yo, stop. But once again, they don't have the obligation to do anything about it. So Russia will continue to invade Finland, now starting to go towards their major cities. They've already captured 2, but there's a whole bunch more over here. So they will start to cut across, focusing in on the southern coastal area, going right towards their capital until they hit a wall of Finnish troops and their advances stop. So what does Russia do at this point? Well, they start to go up north. And what they want to do is they want to capture one of these major cities, and the Finnish defense force is not as strong up here as it is elsewhere. Back on the other front lines, the Russian troops continue to expand outwards, stopping any kind of counteroffensive that Finland might be planning. Finland is able, however, to kind of make a little bit of progress back over here, kind of endangering the supply lines of Russia, but nothing too crazy. Russia eventually stops that, and we're once again back to Russia just being on a full offensive. They now cut down towards this major city and capture it with ease, and this is the breaking point in the war because Finland will go ahead and accept Russia's terms and sit down at a conference with them to draw up some new borders. So Finland doesn't necessarily lose their capital and lose the war, but they know that they can't win, so they're going to go ahead and surrender. Let's take a look at that peace treaty. Alright, and in this peace treaty here, we will have Russia taking over these provinces. And that is a hefty amount of provinces. On the normal map, it looks something like this. And now Russia has exerted itself into the Nordic region. But now they will stop their military antics for a little bit as they go in on a full political focus on developing their nuclear weapons at a very rapid pace. It's going to kind of tank their economy a little bit, and people in the country are going to be like, why? But this is kind of similar to what the Soviet Union did during the Cold War. When the US made their first nuclear bomb, the Soviet Union was like right away on that, and they focused all their resources into developing nukes, and it really did hurt their economy. Of course, Russia here is going to be a little bit more careful and a lot less reckless, but that fundamental goal is still there, to develop nuclear weapons as fast as possible, because the old empire has just made the first nuclear weapon. And yes, the old empire now has nukes. The brown team, almost there. They almost have a weapon. They're testing the nukes and weapons, but they haven't put it into like I guess a missile silo or whatever. They haven't made it, deployable. The old empire has. So their nuclear stockpile only consists of 1 bomb, but that number is of course going to grow. And I now introduce you to a new layer, one that shows the number of nuclear bombs that a country possesses. As you can see, the red one right here next to the capital of the old empire, and they're the only country with a number next to their capital, so they are once again the only nuclear power at this point. But now we're going to go ahead and talk about the kind of dynamics in the square team, because there is a little bit of a ripple effect sent through it now that Russia has been kicked out. And another question you guys might have is like, does the old empire have the authority to kick Russia out? Yes, they do. The old empire formed the Square Alliance. They themselves are the leader of said alliance. It's not like a shared thing. All these other countries in it are, subordinated to the old empire in terms of like alliance relations. The American country doesn't care. The Iberian country doesn't care. And the Norwegian country is actually pretty happy about it. The Norwegians haven't really ever liked the Russians, and that's once again just kind of due to Russia being in this region. Of course, when they were in the square alliance with them, they held joint military drills, but once again, they still don't like each other too much. And now that's amplified a lot more because of what Russia just did in Finland. And Finland is barred from joining the square alliance in the peace treaty. That was a condition that the Russians set. So even though Finland would want to at this point join the square alliance, they can't, and that's because, once again, the Russians barred them from doing so. But now we shift our focus over to Northern Africa, and this is where things are going to get a little messy. The African Union wants to start developing nuclear weapons as well, and that's because they're the 5th strongest country in the world, India number 4. Now, India doesn't show much interest in nuclear weapons, and that's because they are an extremely neutral country. They do not have any favorable or negative views of any country in the world. In fact, they strive to kind of be friends, or I guess friendly, with everybody, because there's a lot of economical benefit in doing so, and you're a lot safer as a country. The African Union, on the other hand, is a little bit different. They are kind of aligned with the old empire in a way, or more so aligned with the square team in a way. But then, of course, they left the square team after World War II and have been kind of doing their own thing. But there is a high level of cooperation with the old empire. So I would say that these two are very friendly with each other. You know, they divided up Northern Africa with each other. And yeah, but seeing as that the brown team, one of their enemies, and the Russians, which are kind of like, you know, now that they are out of the square team alliance, they're a little kind of confused on their relations. They're definitely not as friendly as they used to be. They're definitely trending in a more negative direction, but you never know what the future holds. So the African Union wants to go ahead and develop their own nukes. And this is an issue in a lot of ways. One, because this country is extremely unstable right now. The people within are very in favor of a split. Remember, there were 2 countries that united together to form the African Union. Now they kind of want their sovereignty back, and they want those 2 countries to once again split apart. And that's been an idea that has been fundamentally growing for a while now, and is at its peak. And the government, you know, the Congress, or the, I guess the parliament, whatever it has, is voting on this kind of stuff. The 2 presidents of the country, they don't want to split apart because they understand that splitting apart would be catastrophic. Now, why would it be catastrophic? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at the province map. It's incomplete. That's my fault. But also, it plays a part in the lore. The boundary between these 2 countries is something like this. The boundary between these 2 countries is, you know, something like that. Except it's actually not. It's actually something that looks like this. These are the borders of the Union. These are the 2 previously sovereign nations within. We have the one over here in the Mediterranean and the one over here in the Atlantic. Of course, ever since they united together, they've had a lot of territorial expansion. Now, just real quick to clarify, Sicily is a part of this one, and so is Sardinia, but everything else is brand new, including the Spanish Isles, including southern Iberia, this little plot of land over here near Libya, and all of the land over here in the middle of Africa. And there is an insane amount of disagreement as to who would get what if this country were to split. And that even entails the land over here in southern Iberia, with a lot of people from this country saying that they should be able to get a lot of that, because during the war and the conquest of Iberia, there was a lot more people from here fighting for it than people from here. Now, as for this land, a lot of people agree that, you know, it goes over to this one, because how would this control that? Same thing with Corsica. That's a fairly new addition, but a lot of people agree that that should just belong to this one, as well as the Spanish Isles, and a lot of the, whatever part this is. The eastern part. Sorry, I'm really dumb when it comes to directions for some reason. Those are kind of like the smaller issues. The main issue is this. Who gets what, and where are the borders drawn for this? Now, of course, realistically, you just kind of split it down the middle, right? You know, these guys get everything over here, and these guys get everything over here, but it's really not that simple, because politicians from this country are saying they should have access to the Atlantic Ocean. And if they want access to the Atlantic Ocean, they have to cut off this country from any land that they could or should get down over here. So yeah, it's a big mess. And if that was confusing to you, then yeah, it is confusing. The 2 presidents of this country don't know what to do, and they start up their nuclear program, and that's actually going to be the last straw for the African Union, because now a war from within is going to erupt. The one president that resides in this capital will flee to the other, as the provinces of the former sovereign nation, which I'm just going to call it the Atlantic part of the Union, start to break away. It starts out pretty small with only 2, but that includes the capital province. But then all of the other provinces break away. And this thing declares its independence from the other thing and officially dissolves the African Union. And at first, it goes very smoothly. Of course, the actual leader and president of this country fled to the capital where the other leader resides, because remember, he's in favor of the union, not the separation. But they're able to work it out, and basically the African Union just says, okay, whatever, you're free, and just stay to where you're at right now. And yeah, so they think it's chill. They think they're going to be able to keep whatever they have now, but that's not the case at all. A few days after declaring their independence and forming their new government, they immediately start to send troops down south and take over a big portion of land down here. The East will look at this and say, that's an act of aggression. You're stealing our land. Why would you do that? But these guys are going to continue to take land in this region, pushing all the way over to this. And eventually the two armies are going to start to fight against each other, and this will tumble into full-on war. The East declares the West of infringing on their territory, whereas the West just says that, hey, we are taking our rightful territory and our rightful chunk of this land. The East will disagree, and like I said, war is going to break out, but this is just the beginning of this conflict. So while these two countries are duking it out and fighting in the deserts of Africa, the international community is going to get their hands involved. And why? Well, because the African Union is the 5th strongest country in the world, and they're the 5th strongest country for a reason. They have a lot of valuable land along the northern Mediterranean coast. They're also in the midst of developing a nuclear bomb, although they didn't get very far, at all in terms of using or detonating nukes, because they're still in the research phase, and this whole Civil War thing popped up and that has all been thrown out the window. The old empire is concerned, the brown team is concerned, and the Russians are concerned because this nuclear research is still here. And should the eastern part of this country fall and some other country get a hold of their nuclear research, then you have a weaker country, like for example the red team, having nuclear bombs, and that's not something that you want. The nuclear powers, which at this point is just the old empire, they want to prevent other countries from becoming nuclear powers. So the world is watching as this plays out, and eventually some countries are going to start getting involved. But first, let's go ahead and mess with this border a little bit. Something that I've started to do in these videos is I've started to have a different color for the invading land, although this is a very complicated civil war, so I can't really have a different color because there is no defining shape for the two countries within this union. I mean, there is, but they're fighting over land that isn't theirs, technically. It's very complicated, but I explained it very good in the last episode. So once again, if you need a better explanation, go rewatch the last episode. But anyway, like I said, they're going to be exchanging land back and forth. The Western country is doing a very good job in this part of the country, and the East is having an issue with fighting back, and they're kind of at a loss, and they're kind of disorganized military-wise. They had a lot of military assets in the western part of the country, and those assets are now gone and they are being used by the West, and yeah, they have to kind of reorganize their military branch, all while fighting a civil war. Now I want to go back to the nuclear research real quick. It was being researched in this capital, not this capital. So these guys don't have any nuclear research intel at all, so the world isn't worried about them getting it because the capital is way over here, and it's very unlikely that this country reaches their capital. But yeah, back to the border. As you can see, the East is doing very well, and they are getting very close to the coast, and these guys are really worried about that. So they're going to pull some of their troops and assets. They're going to pull some of their troops and assets from over here and reuse them down here to kind of protect their country a little bit better, and that's exactly what they do. And now someone joins the war between these two. It's actually going to be the Red Libyan team. These guys are a fairly new country. In fact, they are very new, but they've definitely had the time to set up their government, set up their military, and get themselves going. But these guys are joining the war because they have a claim over this land right here. Why do they have a claim over it? Well, it's all colonial. It's always colonial. African disputes, even in real life, to be fair, usually all have to do with colonial issues. So thanks Europe and Asia for that. But they kind of see this as an opportunity to maybe, work together with the West over here and take this land back and help them win the war. Because, if they help them win the war, maybe these guys will help them with getting closer to the Atlantic Ocean. Now, obviously, they can just go up and around through the Gibraltar Gap. But the issue with that is that it's an active war zone, but it's also owned by one country, technically, well, not technically anymore, but it was owned by one country. And that one country, they might have a tax or some kind of embargo when you enter through their strait, and they really don't want that. So they start invading into the Western African Union country, and it goes very well. The African Union was not prepared at all for this. Remember, their military was kind of in a mess and they needed to reorganize it, and part of reorganizing it was pulling a lot of your defensive fronts on your borders away, and that's exactly what they did. So now the Libyan country is basically just walking through their territory. They'll be quick to send the National Guard down to protect. Eventually that does happen, but the National Guard is up against a full-on military. That's not great. But eventually, the military reinforcements will get down there and they will kind of set up a defensive front like this. Okay, so now you're fighting a two-front war. You're fighting a civil war, actually, but you also have a new war over here. Also, there might be some people out there who are pretty salty about World War II. Example 1, the Italian Union. Example 2, the Dark Purple country. Example 3, the French country. And example 4, the brown team. Now the brown team is a little bit different, so I'm going to be leaving them out of this very case, but we'll be focusing in on the two Italian Union countries, specifically the lime one. They are going to go over and they are going to occupy Corsica. This was land that they had. This is land that was stolen from them by the African Union, but they just occupied it back from them, saying this is our land and we're taking it back from you. You obviously don't know what you're doing because you're in a civil war. You're also in another war, and the people here deserve better, so we're taking it for ourselves. The African Union will not respond to this. They don't have the assets, and they obviously think that it's not worth going up there and fighting back against the Lime team. So they will just let it be, and they're going to plan on sorting it out after they finish off their civil war. But it gets more complicated because the Dark Purple team just sent out a bunch of boats and took over these 3 main islands, and now there's a bigger issue here. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, these are a lot less important than Corsica. However, this country, they had a lot of military up here, specifically their navy. And the purple team just walked in and took it. Obviously, the military people here were probably killed, but they're not going to see any resistance from the African Union once again, and the African Union loses out on some very important land in the Mediterranean Sea. Once again, they don't have the assets and they're not focused enough to take it back. So what we see right now is that the African Union will not respond to you if you start taking their land. So these two countries get their revenge. They take back land that was stolen from them. Well, it wasn't stolen from them. They lost it fair and square. Now, the old empire is observing this, and they're seeing that the African Union is kind of struggling. They're seeing that, their defenses are, they're working sort of, but they're also not working. It's very back and forth, but overall, when you look at it in a zoomed out amount of time, they are slowly losing land. Is it a sign that they're going to lose the war? Technically, yes. Technically, yes, it is. You're slowly losing land over time. Your land size is getting smaller and smaller. That means you're going to lose the war eventually. The old empire, though, is confident that they'll be able to recuperate after their military is fully refurbished, but it just keeps getting messier and messier for the African Union, and the economy is starting to tank. Now, economy is also a very important factor in this war, and for many reasons. Number one, the African Union is the 5th strongest country in the world, or it was. It no longer is because it's split into 2 and is being invaded. But that means their currency is very valuable. What else do we know about their currency? It is used by almost all of West Africa. Remember, when the African Union divided up West Africa from the Dark Cyan team, they implemented their currency into these countries to make kind of an economical community in West Africa. Now that the African Union is experiencing a civil war and is falling apart, the currency is becoming very unstable, and for almost all of these countries over here in West and Central Africa, their economies are also tanking from this war. So it is now not just a war and a civil war between the African Union countries. It is a war that involves a lot more of the world, and that in cases, of course, the nuclear powers who are worried, but also all the countries that are being negatively affected economically by this war. So these countries might start to take up sides because they need their currency to be better, and for it to be better, they either one, have to make a whole new currency, which is a long and lengthy process that could have a lot of issues. You also have to exchange your currency for your new currency, and the African Union's currency right now is currently going down rapidly. So the exchange rates are just horrible. So you can't really make a new currency. So what's option 2? You get involved in the war in hopes of sorting this out and, kind of reestablishing that currency. So these countries down here, although they are new, although they are weak, may start to choose sides. But now things are getting even worse for the African Union, as if they aren't already almost at rock bottom. The western country has made landfall in Iberia. Southern Iberia is a very vital area for the African Union because it's kind of their war spoils from World War II. Of course, all of this is also their war spoils. But this land along the coast here is very valuable. There's a lot of people living here, and economically it's very important, but you know, the western one is going up there and ruining it. In fact, they just took all of this. And it is here that the West African country is going to be like, yo, we can, you know, peace out at this point if you just let us take what we have. But the East African country is going to deny their request. And a lot of people are confused as to why. You know, number one, you're losing this war pretty bad. Number two, your military is a mess, although it's almost better. They almost have fixed their military at this point. It's a bad decision not to accept the request and just take the L on this one. They're going to continue to fight, and they're going to continue to make the world worry because the red team just had a very big breakthrough and they're beelining straight towards their capital. Okay, it's bad. The orange team and the lime team have just joined the war on the side of the West African Union. Once again, these countries, they're not very strong. In fact, I would say that they're some of the weakest countries in the world, but they do have militaries and they do have capabilities. And here they are exerting their force, invading into the Western African Union. Eastern. East is right. West is left. Why can't I get that in my head? I don't know what my issue is. North and south, that's easy. East and west, why do I get them mixed up? It's so weird. I don't know why I do that. I'm very dumb, but not as dumb as the people thinking that the government is sending hurricanes into Florida. With these two new countries involved in the war, there is huge concern amongst the nuclear powers. Okay, I keep saying nuclear powers, but when I mean nuclear power, I mean the brown team, the Russians, and the old empire. Technically, there's only one nuclear power in the world, and that is the only country who can use nukes as a weapon. Brown team, still testing them, and the Russians are still creating them. The old empire has nuclear weapons in their arsenal, once again, the only country to do so. So technically they are the only nuclear power, but when I say it in this context, I mean all three of these countries, because they have nuclear programs. But these guys are very worried that the Western African Union is going to collapse and lose, and that the red team is going to get a hold of the nuclear technology, and who knows what the red team does with it, because they very likely could sell it to anybody in the world. Now, I'm not saying that there are countries in the world that, you know, are a threat to any of these guys, but there is definitely countries that, you know, you don't want to get a hold of this. For example, probably don't want the dark green team to get a hold of it. Why? Because the dark green team hates the old empire. They hate them. It's bad. The old empire has stolen so much land from the green team throughout history, and not just the old empire. But remember, the red team started it. They took all this land from them, and then, you know, it got to this point. The green team used to be located over here. They have been pushed over here. They hate the old empire. Russia, they have a lot of ops. Finland. If Finland got nukes, they would most likely nuke Russia. And the triangle team in particular is kind of worrying. Of course, the brown team, they wouldn't have an issue with it, although now the brown team is kind of alienated from the triangle team. They were super close before. Now that the war has ended, it's kind of like whatever. But the old empire and the Russians too, they definitely don't want the triangle team to get a hold of nuclear weapons. So yes, there is a large cause of concern that nuclear technology in the African Union can get stolen and sold to anybody in the world. And just like that, the old empire enters the war on the side of the Western African Union in a proxy war. Now, when I say proxy war, what does that mean? It means that the old empire isn't directly involved in the civil war in the African Union. They will kind of choose a side. Now, in real life, an example of a proxy war was, you know, Vietnam or Korea. The Soviet Union was on the side of North Korea, and the USA was on the side of South Korea. That was a proxy war. Same thing with Vietnam, you know, the Soviets on the side of the North, US on the side of the South. There was no direct confrontation between the two sides. The US and the Soviets didn't go to war, but they fought in Korea and Vietnam. Now, in this scenario, it's the same thing. You know, the African Union is going to send, you know, maybe troops, maybe volunteers more likely, and equipment to the Western African Union, but they're not going to directly get involved. However, it gets a little bit different because in that support for the African Union, they also declare war on the red country. Why do they do that? Because they are threatening the capital of the African Union and they don't want them to get the nuclear technology, so they join the war on the side of the African Union against the red team. They're not fighting directly against the Western African Union, but they are fighting directly against the red team. Once again, I'm extremely tired. If this makes no sense to you, I'm sorry. Just watch the colors change. So immediately the old empire, the strongest country in the world, is going to blitz right into the capital of the red team. And it is an embarrassing first couple of days for the red team because they are getting absolutely pummeled by the old empire. The old empire, more than likely, already had troops on the border of this country because you know, it's the old empire. But yeah, it's just straight up, I don't want to say massacring because that's not what they're doing, but it's horrible. I mean, they're getting insanely just destroyed military wide. They lose about a third of their country before, you know, they start to fight back. And what does the other two nuclear powers think about this? The brown team is kind of against it a little bit, but they're only against it because the old empire is for it. Now, they don't want the red team to get that nuclear information, so they're on board with stopping them, but maybe not the old empire stopping them. The Russians, they don't really care. I mean, it is what it is for them, but they once again, they shared the same feeling with the brown team and the old empire that they don't want the red team to get that nuclear technology in the capital. You might be thinking to yourself, why don't they just move the technology out of the capital? Well, where are they going to move it to? Are you going to give it to the old empire? That doesn't make much sense. They already have nukes. And maybe your nuclear research is a little bit different from theirs. Maybe your nuclear research helps them out. And remember, the African Union and the old empire, they're not really allies. Now, they're friendly with each other, but that doesn't really warrant them giving them nuclear information. So really, it's a matter of like, we can't move this information anywhere because we don't have any, you know, really close allies that we share technology with. So that information is stuck there in the capital city. I mean, you could technically move it to any part of the country, but that's probably the safest place for it. But yeah, back down south, this little lime team country is doing amazing work against the Eastern African Union. They actually do strategize with the red team a little bit. You know, there's probably militia groups in the red team if I had to guess, but they kind of cooperate with them and take over this big portion of this southern area. And overall, the Eastern African Union is collapsing in the south, and that makes sense. You know, there's probably close to nobody living here, so the militaries really are just kind of walking through this area. But eventually, the red team will stop fighting because they have to go deal with this. And by no means are they going to be able to stop this. It's only a ticking time bomb, and eventually they will lose. But you can try to slow it down. It's probably not going to work though. But now we need to talk about the puppet state over here in Iberia, controlled by the Eastern African Union, not controlled by the Western one. This puppet state is actually the Dark Scion team. The Dark Scion team saw its end in World War II when the Square team took it over and got rid of it. It no longer existed. It technically still exists here, although it is controlled by the African Union under a totally different name. Hey, here's an idea. We invade the puppet state, take its capital, and do some magic. And by that, we mean revive the Dark Scion team. So yes, the Dark Scion team breaks away from the African Union. This puppet state declares its independence. We can go ahead and get rid of the puppet state outline right here. And the resources within the Dark Scion team are going to obviously outnumber the resources centered here. And although they are kind of like a breakaway group, they will be able to take it away from the Eastern African Union, and they will side with the Western African Union. So yeah, these guys are rapidly losing territory. And even though they got their military reorganized, it might be too late because the final nail in the coffin is en route towards their capital. The old empire, though, is catching up to the red team, and eventually they will kind of force them into capitulation. Not like that, though, like that. We have these two militia groups who are going to keep fighting. The old empire will do a pretty good job at eradicating this one. But this one's a little bit more stubborn. In fact, it kind of just mingles in with the lime one, and the old empire isn't at war with the lime team country, so they're just going to kind of let it happen. But at this point, it's kind of like African Union. You just got to call it quits because it might be too much land to try to retake. The leaders of this country, which now there are technically two because the leader of this one fled to this one, they agree on almost everything. But here, they don't agree. One of them says that, hey, we should just go ahead and give up this land. It's whatever. The other one says, no, we need to fight for it and take it back. Make your guesses as to who said what. Okay. The leader of this one wants to take it back. The leader of this one says, screw it, just whatever, take your land back. We have other things we need to focus on, like this. They disagree. Eventually it gets so bad that they have to leave each other. It's like a breakup. It's tragic. They're housed in two areas in the capital, and the government doesn't know who to listen to because this is like the only time they've ever disagreed on something, and the government collapses. Yeah, it just straight up collapses. It's insane. The world has never seen a government collapse like this before in a way that it just kind of implodes. Like, you know, of course, there are factors that lead up to these kind of implosions, and this is really the only time that an implosion has ever happened. When I say implosion, I mean that it just stops working. That's what this is. With other collapsing governments, it usually takes a little bit of time. You can kind of see it wither away, but at this time it's just, straight up just gone. So the African Union doesn't have a government anymore, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, because this is an empty nation. So the old empire is going to very quickly start taking as much of this land as possible. They are going to absolutely blitz through this territory and take as much of everything as they can, because, oh no, they get the research that they need, they secure it, and they take it back to their capital. Okay, the world is relieved that, the nuclear technology is not going to get out of the bag. Cool. So, yeah, the Western African Union wins, sort of, because the old empire is currently governing over the East African Union. It's insanely weird what's happening. Basically, the old empire says, hey, we are the East African Union. We're acting for them now. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and we're going to end this war, and we're going to draw borders, and we're going to go ahead and figure this thing out, because obviously the world is suffering down here. The brown team, the Russians and the old Imperians, they almost all had a heart attack when the African Union collapsed. So yeah, we just need to chill out, and we're going to sort this out. We're going to be as nice to you guys as possible so that we can avoid any future and current escalation. So let's take a look at what they draw up. All right, so let's break this down. So starting with, let's start with the Western African Union here. These guys are going to get this land. They're also going to go ahead and get this land in Iberia, and they are an independent country. And as for the red team, they're really just going to get a slap on the wrist. When I say slap on the wrist, they're going to lose a third of their territory. Not that much. Ah, yes, the infamous 1 pixel, actually maybe 2 pixels, strikes again. They're going to lose like a third of their territory, and it's really funny what the old empire does here. It's basically saying, hey, don't do it again, because looky here at your capital. But yeah, they're allowed to exist. They do still exist. Just, don't do it again, because once again, looky here. Now, as for everything else, the old empire is going to show some mercy towards the triangle team, which is extremely surprising. The lime team will be allowed to keep Corsica, and the dark purple team will be allowed to keep its islands. Now, as for this land over here, guess who's back? Back again. The dark cyan team reemerges in the world, and Russia's extremely confused by this. Why are you being nice to the triangle team? Well, the old empire doesn't see the triangle team as a threat. They don't take them seriously. So it's like, okay, whatever, you're back, doesn't change anything. Cool. The dark cyan team was probably like one of the biggest, I don't want to say outrage because it wasn't an outrage, but it was definitely one of those countries where people wanted back, and it's back. That was one of the notes that I took during the last pre-recorded session is people want the dark cyan team back. How can I bring it back? Well, I kind of, knew that the African Union needed to fall apart at some point, and, they took a hold of the dark cyan team as a puppet during World War II, and this kind of works out in their favor. So guess who's back? The dark cyan team is back. Now, are they the same dark cyan team? Actually, yes. Same culture, same people, same language, blah, 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 blah. Different government, though, but the government holds the same fundamental philosophy as the old one had, just in a more modern sense now. So, of course, they're not focused on colonization. And, as far as their relations with the other triangle team countries go, maybe we'll discuss that in the next episode. But that actually does it for the no, I'm just kidding. It does it for the African Union. As kind of a consolation and a, like, hey, you owe me, the old empire will take control of Sardinia. Yeah, they'll take control of Sicily, and the African Union is like, bruh, what are they supposed to say? What are they supposed to do? They lost. At the end of the day, the government collapsed, and the old empire set it back up for them. Does this mean that they're in debt to them? No, they're not. Why are they not in debt with them? Because the old empire got hella land over here, and they got hella land from Sicily. It's cool, bro. Hey, just don't let it happen again. Just whatever. This one's on me. So yeah. Now we have a new term that we had to create for these two countries, because we can no longer call them the Eastern and Western African Unions, because that is not true. They're not a union anymore. So we are going to be calling this one the Western African country, and this one will be called the Mediterranean country. Will I remember that in future videos? Hell no. I'll try, but I really can't guarantee it. All right, cool. So that's all nice and dandy. The world can kind of, sigh of relief. Now, what happens with the currency? Because these guys are no longer using that currency. They have created their own, and they are converging it. They want to get as far away from this country as possible. They create their own currency. And of course, creating currency is something that takes time. So this will be something that is going to be happening for throughout this episode and the next couple of episodes. But they create their own currency, and who adopts that currency? The orange team and the lime team. They both adopt that currency. As for everyone else, they will keep the same currency that this country uses, the Mediterranean currency uses. And that's kind of messy. It's really messy, actually, because that currency is not very stable right now. Also, these two countries are not, fully set up yet. They're both rebuilding, especially this one. This one has a lot of work to do. But these guys will kind of take a step back in the videos. They're not going to be doing too much. They're going to be focusing on their rebuilds. They're going to be focusing on their currency issues and trying to alleviate Central and Western Africa. So we exit Africa at the end of our first proxy war, and we can start to look at some other things. Like, for example, the Brown team making its first nuclear weapon. That's right, the Brown team will join the old empire as one of the only other nuclear powers in the world. There are now two. The Brown team has nuclear weapons in their arsenal, as does the old empire, and they can use them however and whenever they want. But this will create nuclear deterrence between these two countries. Of course, that doctrine has not been established just yet, so it's kind of just like, it's a new thing. They don't have very many nukes. Or do they? While all that fun war stuff is happening, the old empire has been in the lab, and they have created 4 more nuclear weapons, pushing their total up to 5. And this is extremely alarming for Russia, because Russia is still in the developmental stage. They are still building nuclear test sites, and they are still building the bomb. They are extremely behind when it comes to, comparison between the old empire and the Brown team. But how did the old empire outclass the Brown team? How did they get so far ahead of them? Well, look at their territory. They're the strongest country in the world. They are technically now the most technologically advanced country in the world. Of course, they caught up with and surpassed the Brown team, who is only limited to this much land and only limited to the scientists that they have. The old empire is freaking huge. They can abduct scientists from anywhere they want. Not really, but you get the point. So yeah, they surpassed them pretty easily too. But now we jump over here to Indonesia. This is an area which has not been touched ever since it was freed and kind of left alone. There isn't too much happening here. These guys are all very chill with each other. It's just, it's kind of, you do your own thing, I'll do my own thing. But the only thing is that this little light cyan country here, they are in need of some economical assistance, and as is this yellow one. So what are they gonna do? We have our new union. We have our new African Union, except it's not in Africa. It's over here in the Asia Pacific region. And it's really, not the same kind of union. This is they're both giving up their sovereignty to create a new country. Although the capital will remain over here, it's a new government. It's a combined government. It's new. This new country is a union. Not the same kind of union as this, though. No dual capitals, no dual leaders, just a union, a normal union. Sorry, I'm tired. I need to go to bed soon. But we need to go ahead and go down south to southwestern Africa / Central Africa, because this place is doomed. They're not actually doomed, but they are in trouble because they currently have the currency that is the Mediterranean countries. And remember, these guys are going through a rebuild right now. Their currency kind of collapsed during the Civil War, and they were the 5th strongest country in the world. So their currency was very strong. And now it's not so strong, and these countries are feeling that. So what we have happening here is a series of wars over this. Countries need to go and get more resources because they don't have any resources left because they extinguished them all trying to cope with the currency collapse. So, they might go try to steal any resources that any other countries have. And one particular country that's doing this is going to be the dark green one. They are going to be going after this red country here. Now, these countries are not very strong, and that's thanks to the fact that they are so new in the system. They're also not very populated, but they are still, militarily capable, just on a way smaller scale. So these guys start to invade the red country, who is, I'm not gonna lie, they're on the brink of collapse. They're not very economically stable, obviously, none of these countries are, but politically, they're a complete mess. This was one of the countries that was kind of botched by the African Union. They didn't set it up very well, and that is thanks to the fact that they messed up the borders big time in terms of ethnicities and races and stuff like that. The southern half of this country is not the same as the northern half of this country. It's like 2 different groups of people mushed into one country, and it didn't work. But now the green team is invading them, and eventually this other group up here will surrender, and we can go ahead and take a look at a peace deal that this dark green country is going to draw up. So what we have here is the dark green country annexing this southern half, and you might be thinking, what about the northern half? Well, the northern half is actually going to be given over to this dark purple country here, and that's because these people up here are the same group of people over here. And overall, everyone is happy. Now what about the people down here? Are they the same as the people in the dark green country? No, they are not. These people down here are actually part of the same group as the people in this yellow country over here. So now there is rising tensions between these two because these guys are claiming that this group should have been given to them. So they're mad and they got hands that they want to throw, but they may not throw those hands. We'll see. Now going up north to this light gray country here, these guys are cooked. They are not in a good spot. And you might be thinking, you know, everyone here is cooked, right? Sort of. Remember, the orange country and the green country, they kind of got rid of the currency of the Mediterranean one and they adopted the currency of the West African one. And that can be a little bit rough because you can't exchange worthless currency for a new currency that just got created. It's a whole big jumbo of mess. So these guys are also unstable, but they're a little bit better off than these other guys. And here I'm going to introduce something new to the series. We have the introduction of economical alliances. The Western African country will create an economical alliance, one that focuses in on their currency and developing Western Africa, and of course the orange country will join it as well as the green one over here. So note, this is not a military alliance. This is a purely economical alliance between these three countries. If one of them were to get attacked by another one, the other two would not come to the aid of them because they are not obligated to do so. So with that in mind, now we kind of have to rework some of these other alliances because not all of them are military. Specifically, the Diamond Alliance is not military, it's an economical alliance, as is the Circle Alliance. Now the Circle one's a little bit weird. These guys, if they were to get attacked, if any of them were to get attacked, the other two would come to their aid because they're close like that, but they're not necessarily obligated to do so by the military alliance because it's not a military alliance, it's kind of like an interest alliance. So I'm going to be making them green here, even though technically they are sort of a military alliance, but also sort of not. And they're green because, you know, economy, money, same thing. But I'm going to be maintaining the yellow color for the military alliance, even though something like red would make more sense. So the square alliance is a military alliance, and the triangle alliance is a military alliance. They will stay yellow. Oh, these guys over here, I forgot about them. They are also in this economical alliance. All right, cool. So we have a new thing in the series. You know, we have economical alliances now, and a few of these might form across the world throughout the next couple of episodes. But as for this one, I'm going to leave it there. But back down to this gray country here, they are suffering, and there are a lot of issues that they don't know how to solve. Geographically, they're in a horrible spot. You know, you're kind of like in the sub-Saharan region / Saharan region. It's just, yeah, they're not in a great spot. So what they're going to do, So what they're going to do is they're going to start selling their land to their neighbors in order to get money. Now, the issue with this is that once again, they still use that Mediterranean currency. So they're going to be smart about it, and they're going to sell their land to countries that don't use that currency, aka countries that have, you know, a more valuable currency, such as the Western African currency. And are these guys in a position to really be acquiring land? Not really. So does this make too much sense in the grand scheme of things? No, not really, but I want to, you know, do something fun, so we're doing that. Realistically though, these guys are once again more economically better off than these other guys, so it's within their arsenal to do such a thing, and it's not like they're going to be buying a lot of land, just a bit, you know. So the orange country will buy this land. There's some ethnic relations and connections in this region, so it's kind of like a good thing, you know. Maybe acquiring this land will heed you more economical benefit than not, because purchasing it is going to obviously negatively affect your economy, but in the long term, those benefits might outweigh them. As for the lime green country, they're going to get a similar amount of land over here, which will look something like this. Okay, cool. So the gray team sold off some of their land. They now have a lot of currency, or a lot of money in this currency, and they're going to try to convert it into their own currency. They're going to try to form their own currency in order to really save their economy, and we'll check in with them later on. But now we need to shift our focus elsewhere because the Cold War just intensified by threefold. We already know that Russia and the old empire cut their relations. They no longer hold diplomatic relations, they are rivals, and they are starting to become enemies because of the nuclear program and the old empire not sharing their technology with Russia. We already know about all that stuff. I've covered it a lot. But remember, I said that a tripolar system is emerging. Right now, it's a bipolar system between Russia and the old empire. China is the second strongest country in the world, and these guys' sphere of influence kind of overlaps. So let's take a look at Russia's. Russia's looks something like this. It's pretty much just Eastern Europe / their puppet states, this blue state over here, and then a lot of Central Asia going into Eastern Asia. Why can I not get that right? I'm gonna have to put like sticky notes on my monitor, like East, West, because I'm stupid apparently. But now let's take a look at the old empire's sphere of influence. It's going to be a little crazy, I'm not going to lie. Okay, it actually isn't as crazy as it looks, but there's a little bit of some foreign stuff going on, like they have influence over Norway, of course, over in America. So this isn't showing everything, but it's like showing their domestic influence. So they have, of course, themselves a lot of the Balkan area of Europe, and a lot of Northern Africa going into the Horn of Africa, and of course their own puppet state. Now let's take a look at China's sphere of influence. Okay, this one's the crazy one. They have a lot of influence specifically over the Asia Pacific region, going all the way down into Australia. These guys, remember, they had a colony down here, so that's why they have influence all the way down here. But they also have the Philippine Islands, which kind of like benchmarks them into this area. And you might be thinking, what's going on over here with Korea? Well, Korea has its own influence, which is something like that. You also might be wondering, why is this country split in half? Because it's equally influenced by both Korea and China. Now, we can also, like look at India. They're the fourth strongest in the world. Their influence looks something like that. But we're only focused on these three because they're the three strongest and they are the three contenders in the Cold War. What do you also notice? They all overlap each other, except for the old empire in China, but really you could like kind of do that. So it's close, but they all kind of meet in this region right here. And I'm not saying that anything's going to happen here, but this is a very important spot. Also, India is a part of that, but remember, they are extremely neutral. So they just kind of, are sitting back like, hey, we're just chilling, trade with us. India is a very smart country. But back to the main point, China is the second strongest country in the world. Their influences are overlapping. And what are they thinking about the Cold War developing between Russia and the old empire? Well, they are pissed off, and rightfully so. They are one of the top campaigners for the, anti-nuclear act. Them and their allies do not like the idea of nuclear obliteration because, who does, right? Other than these guys, apparently. And once the old empire started developing their own, they were kind of like, distancing themselves from them. And now that Russia was kicked out of the square team, and now that Russia is also having its own nuclear program, they are just completely done with them. China was focused on going into space, getting stuff into space. The space race, which it isn't really a race at all, it was kind of just like a whole world thing, but it no longer is a whole world thing. It's kind of getting back to an individual country thing. So we very well could see a space race. But China was all about that, and that kind of push to go into space has dropped tremendously because the old empire and Russia, two of the most technologically advanced countries in the world, are focused on building nukes. They don't care about space anymore. China is mad about that, and now China is going to go ahead and be like, yo, screw both of you. We are cutting diplomatic ties with both of you. And now we have the strongest country in the world, the second strongest country in the world, and the third strongest country in the world holding no diplomatic relations and having this rivalry and kind of almost hostile act towards each other. It's not completely hostile, but it's getting there. Remember, they were friendly not too long ago, so it's still kind of like neutral towards negative kind of relations, but it's getting worse. So now that China has officially entered the Cold War, we are in a tripolar system. The spheres of influences are all kind of overlapping and it's getting heated. But behind everyone's back and behind their own allies' back, China is going to do some crazy stuff behind closed doors. They send out spies to both Russia and the old empire, maybe the brown team as well. And what's significant about all three of these countries? Well, they all have nuclear programs. China is trying to develop their own nuclear bombs. That is completely against what they have publicly announced to the world. And they are doing so because in a Cold War, if the enemies have weapons that are stronger than you, you're cooked. Specifically, nuclear weapons. If you're in this kind of rivalry slash race slash Cold War with other countries and they have nukes and you don't, you have to develop your own nukes in order to achieve that nuclear deterrence, which goes along with mutually assured destruction. So they start developing their own nukes behind closed doors. Nobody knows about this except for themselves. So now there are 4 countries in the world with nuclear programs: the old empire, Russia, the brown team, and now China. That is going to be very significant later on. So let's check in on Russia and how their nuclear program is going. Oh, Russia has developed its first nuclear weapon, ready to deploy whenever they want. There are now 3 nuclear powers in this world, and 2 of them are superpowers. The brown team isn't a superpower because they lack a lot since they got destroyed in the war. But the old empire and Russia are superpowers. China technically is a superpower in terms of everything but nuclear weapons. Once they get their first nuclear weapon, then they will officially be a superpower. They're kind of like on the side. They still are a superpower, but not technically. But once they get that nuclear weapon, they will be. All right, cool. So Russia has nuclear bombs. The old empire's like, shit. Okay, so now Russia has nuclear bombs. The old empire's like, dang, we're not going to produce anymore right now, but we're going to increase funding to the production of just in case. We don't know what Russia's doing and we don't know what the brown team's doing, but we suspect that they're still developing bombs and we suspect that they're going to add a few more to their arsenal. Additionally, the border between the old empire and Russia is going to be armed for the first time in many years. These two were both in the Square Alliance for a very long time with each other. Well, not a super long time, but they were both in the Square Alliance. They were allies. They didn't have their border, with military personnel on it. That has changed. There are now old Empyrean troops and Russian troops on this border. And they're not having a standoff, In fact, they're probably chill because they've known each other for a while. But over time, those troops are going to get replaced with newer ones. And those newer troops are going to be trained to not like the old empire and Russia, vice versa. So you can see how this is going to further escalate. All right, the old empire has acknowledged that Russia has nuclear weapons. They're a little bit worried about it, but they're going to kind of do what Russia did after they were kicked out of the Square Alliance. And they're going to try to flex their muscles a little bit. Now, in order to justify this, they're going to say that they are in need of more resources, which realistically, that's not a good justification for invading another country. There really is no justification for invading another country. But they say to the world, hey, we're going to go after this yellow country over here because we need more resources. We need new resources. It's not that they don't have resources and a plentiful amount of it, but they just kind of want more. Remember, these guys are fundamentally imperialist. They don't really care. They're going to do what they want to do. And by the way, this country is freaking huge. Like, this is like kind of like Rome in the modern day, which is insane to think about. But their borders, I'm not going to lie, they're getting too big to really maintain. The old empire is a very strong political country. They have little to no instability at all. And the only cases where they do get instability is when they claim new regions. For example, like this area over here that just got, if they have any instability, it's over there. Elsewhere, like in the main core area, no instability. Everybody is very happy with the government, and the government is very happy with everyone else. So they are able to maintain this much land, but continuing to go on and grow even more is always risky. Once again though, they're imperialists, they don't care. After having troops staged on their border for a few weeks, they finally go in. And it's very hard to see the capital in major cities, so let me just make this quick for you guys. They cut across almost immediately over and take the capital with ease. Remember, the old empire, strongest country in the world, their military is unmatched. So they see not a lot of issues with invading a weak country like this one. Now remember, this country has a lot of ops. It's been through a lot. This whole region has been through a lot, and it's very hostile. Well, the old empire, I mean, they obviously don't care about that. They have one goal, and that goal is to take this country and its land. What they're going to do is they're basically just going to spearhead across the country and take their major cities. They can do this because, one, they are the strongest country in the world, and two, the yellow country is not doing a good job at defending themselves. So after taking all the major cities that I can see with my eyes, because I might be slightly colorblind, the yellow team will have to surrender because, not you, they will have to surrender because they can't fight anymore. And now we can take a look at what the old empire does in this peace treaty. Also, major cities, there's a lot more than what's being shown here, but it's very hard to keep up with population growth in this series because I would have to go back and just sprinkle dots all around the area. It's hard to do. But these, I guess, are just their biggest cities. Anyway, peace treaty, let's look at that. All right, that took me like a minute to draw in, and you might be thinking, what is happening here? Well, they are going to relinquish these three provinces down here to their puppet state. Why are they doing that? Why don't they just take it for themselves? Well, once again, taking too much land can be problematic no matter how stable you are. But to me, it just makes sense for them to give some land to their puppet state, maybe to appease their government a little bit better, even though they technically control that government. Here's my seconds, whatever. And for the rest of this, well, full annexation. Another country is wiped off the map by the old empire, and now their influence is impeding into both the spheres of Russia and China. This will heighten tensions between the old empire and Russia and China a lot. They're kind of like, yo, get out of Central Asia, stop expanding so much. And the old empire is like, who are you to talk? But China, they really aren't as crazy as these two are in terms of land expansion. They're just kind of chilling and focusing on themselves, which is why they're the second strongest country in the world. But yeah, this makes them not so happy, and it's going to cause a ripple effect and chain reaction in Central Asia, which we'll get to here in a second. But first, let me erase this. And second, let's head over to South America. All right, South America, the most peaceful continent in the world at this point. Well, I mean, Oceania doesn't do anything. And there has been a few wars here, so never mind. The second most peaceful continent in the world. What's happening here? What are they doing? Well, the Irish country, when they kind of left their colonies alone, they created a little bit of an issue, as most colonial powers do when they leave their colonies. There's some overlapping claims here. Basically, the orange team over here is it's a country that is wanting ocean access. Big surprise there. But it's not that they want ocean access, it's that they claim ocean access. They pretty much claim this entire northern region over here, and the red team claims it as well. The issue is that the red team controls it. So what do they do about it? Well, they go to war about it, of course. The orange team will start its invasion of the area that it claims from the red team. The red team is caught off guard by this, and their reaction is very slow. The orange team does a very good job at taking this area, and in terms of ethnicities and who lives here, it's pretty much all the same. It's Irish people. They all descended from Ireland, so there's not much of diversity as there is in Africa. This is a little bit more complicated over here. There were multiple rulers over this region. As for this one, not really. So the orange team takes its claim from the red team, and they do so with very little resistance, as the red team is still mobilizing against them. And they're like, hey, we're done. Let's sit down to a peace deal, and we won this war. You're obviously not fighting back. Let's end it. The red team says no. And the red team's like, Idiots. Why would they say something so mean and cruel like that? Well, that's because they're invading into their territory now. The red team's reaction was, like I said, very slow. However, it was not invisible because now the red team is pushing back and the red team is kicking the orange teams. Yeah, the red team is probably the strongest colony that the Irish country released. It might be stronger than the brown one, but the brown one will definitely give them a run for their money. It's very close between these two. But the red team invades up and takes back their entire territorial claim. And at this point, the orange team is like, can we just sort this out peacefully? Like, I know that I attacked you first, but can you just please give us access to the ocean? And the red team's like, no. And then they're like, okay, fine, we surrender. Just stop invading us. And the red team's also like, no, you suck. You did something mean to us. The red team took it personally. And after they take their final major city, they're like, okay, fine, let's just work this out peacefully. You know, after we took over a third of your country. The orange team is a little bit salty about this, but they kind of have to go along and surrender because they lost 2 of their major cities. In fact, those are their only 2 major cities outside of their capital. So let's take a look at what they work out in the peace deal. All right, that is simple enough. They take over this much land, and there are no provinces in South America because I haven't drawn them in yet, and I don't know if I ever will. Well, I will have to eventually because it's kind of sucky, really? It kind of sucks that I haven't done it already. The provinces do add a lot more spice to the wars, especially when you see like what provinces countries get, what provinces they target, and you know, it's just more interesting. But yeah, they take this land, simple enough, and that ends the war, and the orange team is mad about it because now they're even further away from the ocean, and now they have no claim over this area, so they can't even justify anything against the red team ever again. And once again, not that you can really ever justify war. All right, South America, we're going to be going back here in the next episode probably, but let's go ahead and jump back over to Central Asia because, like I said, some important stuff is happening here, stuff that involves the Cold War and the dynamic of the world. Very important, obviously. And we're going to be looking at the alliance map. Obviously, the old empire's entrance into the Central Asian region is troubling for everyone here because the old empire is you know, they're not going to hold back against anybody should they have to. Should they ever suddenly decide that they need more land and need more resources, no one's going to stop them from just invading these guys. And no one over here hates them more than the green team. The green team is the biggest op in history. They hate the old empire. If relations are bad between 2 countries, it can always be worse because the green team hates the old empire, and likewise, the old empire hates the green team because they hate them. This goes all the way back to the first episode of the series. It's that serious. It's like India and Pakistan on crack, except India is like 10 times more powerful, not even 10, like 100 times more powerful than Pakistan, just to kind of put it into perspective. So the green team is done with it. They're like, screw you guys, we're going to be creating an alliance. And the old empire's like, okay, cool. But it gets worse. These other countries all over here start to join it. Instead of just the green team in an alliance by itself like a loser, it's actually these 3 Central Asian countries. Jeez. Once again, the old empire is like, okay, like I could wipe you out all in a war within a matter of a month. And then Russia joins this alliance. They become the leader of this alliance. It was planned out by the green team. They were just the first country to publicly announce it. And all of a sudden, the Cold War went from just kind of like a rivalry to full-on enemyship. They're ops now. Russia and the old empire will now hold hostile relations with each other, constantly insulting each other in world relations, and the Cold War starts to heat up. Russia now has its own faction, just as the old empire has its own faction consisting of Norway and Iberia. Oh yeah, and America. But Russia's alliance is a lot more centered around, you know, close neighbors. As for the old empire, you know, their furthest ally is all the way over here in America, and their closest one is all the way over in Iberia. Russia's allies are close. They want to and kind of need to respond to Russia creating their alliance. You know, they just added 3 new countries, and although these countries aren't super strong, they are notable, and they're all close to each other, and they're all on the border of the old empire, and the old empire is like, yo, our turn. So the old empire is going to recruit another country into their alliance and make a good guess as to who it's going to be. I'll give you a hint. They are historically very close. The Farmers Union joins the war, and I'm going to have to try to start calling them the white team because they are not the Farmers Union anymore. The people of these 2 countries are extremely close together, and the government of the Farmers Union, there I go again. The government of the white country has been very favorable of the old empire because of those historical ties and how the old empire has helped them out historically, so they are still very much in favor of the old empire, even if the old empire doesn't share the same strong feelings. I mean, don't get me wrong, they like them, but it's not as strong as the white team's love for them. Anyway, the white team does join in on the Square Alliance. They are kind of an important one because they're right on the border of Russia. But with this growing power dynamic in Europe specifically, some of these other European countries are a little bit worried and they feel like they might have to start choosing sides before they get invaded. They don't want to seem hostile towards, the number 1 or number 3 power in the world. So we're going to look at the purple team first. They fought alongside the old empire in World War II and were allowed to take a lot of land because of that. They also are, they're not on any terms with the white team, but they're kind of chill with each other, like mutual respect. So the purple team will go ahead and declare their support for the old empire. This does not mean they're joining their alliance. They're just in the sphere of influence of the old empire, and therefore are going to go ahead and kind of like double down on that and say, yo, we kind of like these guys a little bit more than you. And the purple team isn't the only country doing this, because the old empire's influence is once again very large, and it reaches all the way over here into Africa, where the African Union previously split. We have the Mediterranean African country and the Western African country. These two do not like each other at all. But we do know that this one is friendly with the old empire, and they will declare their side, saying, hey, we are aligned with the old empire. We're not going to join the square team in any way or anything, because we don't want to get drawn into a war should one ever happen, but we like these guys. And their enemy, which is of course the West African country, will be like, no, screw you, we like the Russians. So now the sphere of influences are definitely overlapping. It's a little bit different. I drew this in the last episode. I'm going to show it to you again. But here are their two spheres as of now. The old empire also has influence over Norway, of course, but this is what the old empire looks like. And now that these two have declared their sides, Russia's influence now kind of spills over into this area. The West African country is aligned with them. So yes, further issues. We'll of course touch up more on that as the series progresses, but it's not written down in my notes for this video. But now that these alliances are growing and their spheres of influences are overlapping, Russia realizes that they need to produce more nuclear weapons to deter the old empire. First of all, if you look at the nuclear map real quick, the old empire has 5 nukes in their arsenal. Brown team has 1. Russia has 1. We know this. Russia wants to create more. They want to, first of all, they want to get on equal ground with the old empire. If they have 5 nukes, we need to have 5 nukes as well. Should a nuclear war ever happen, we are going to drop our 1 nuclear bomb on their capital city, but they're going to drop their 5 nuclear bombs, 1 on our capital city, and then 4 on our our 4 most populated cities, whatever those are. So we need to catch up with them, and we need to make this equal so the brown team, the Russians will start to mass produce nuclear weapons, aiming at around the 5 range, but they might go a little bit over that. Additionally, the brown team has been creating more nuclear weapons. Their nuclear research program is a lot slower than these two, and that's due to the technological disadvantages that they have. Losing a lot of their land in World War II. So they're a little bit slower, but they still are developing those bombs, and they are going to try to get up to par with these two. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit because the world right now is kind of just watching the Cold War. There aren't too many wars happening. The world is just kind of watching. So we're going to jump ahead just a small amount of time, maybe like 2 months, maybe 3, 4, possibly 5. Actually, you make it up. How many months did we jump ahead? Did we jump ahead a month? A few years? It's up to you guys to determine. But by the time we get to the end of this little jump, Russia has 10 nuclear bombs in their arsenal, making them the strongest nuclear power in the world, ahead of the old empire. Additionally, we see the brown team go all the way up to 4. Now, why hasn't the old empire kept up with this? Because the Russians and the brown team have been doing this in secret. But as we know, with time progression, technology also advances, and we also know that satellites are a thing in space at this point. The old empire was the first country to launch a satellite into space. Has there been a man in space yet? I don't know. It's not too relevant to the plot of this. But their satellites are getting more advanced, and they are now using them to spy on other countries. And they have just discovered that Russia has been producing way more nuclear bombs than they had originally thought. They thought that they were trying to get on equal grounds with them originally, like, hey, they're going to make 4 more bombs in their arsenal, whatever, we'll be equal, it's fine. But now they know that they have doubled that. They have 10. So the old empire needs to go ahead and catch up with that, so they start mass producing nuclear weapons again. Remember in the last episode, or maybe the one before that, I said that the old empire, they dump more money into that program, but they kind of paused the production of nuclear weapons because the old empire is a very careful country, I want to say. They know that nuclear bombs can be very destructive. They've tested them. They know. They've seen the destruction with their own eyes. Of course, nuclear weapons haven't been used on other territory just yet, so we don't know the effect it has on civilian and human population. So they've been chilling, but now that Russia has outnumbered them, they are going to go ahead and try to catch up. And now we see yet another small time jump. Russia has paused its nuclear program because they are kind of similar to the old empire in the fashion that they know what these bombs are capable of. They want to be careful. You don't want to make too many, because if you have too many, your enemy's going to make too many, and then all of a sudden it's a big old mess. The brown team also pauses their production. They simply just cannot do it anymore. They need more resources. So we go through another time jump here, and we catch back up with the old empire, who has produced more nuclear bombs and is now looking at 13 nukes in their arsenal. That is more than Russia. Russia's like, oh crap, we need to make more bombs. And you can kind of see where this is heading. Mass nuclear bomb production. I said mass before. When I say mass in this context, I mean like hundreds of nukes. But we're not there just yet. But Russia sees this now, and we're done with the time jump stuff. It's been like maybe a year or two in my context, but in your context, it of course can be different because this is your guys' series. But it's been a few years, and the old empire just finished off with their 13 bombs, and Russia is mad about it. They, of course, are going to start producing again, but now they want to kind of flex their muscles a little bit and kind of deter the old empire from making any more nukes after they, of course, catch up to them. So what are the Russians going to do? Well, they are going to do something very interesting. They're going to declare war on this cyan country over here, which, by the way, is in their sphere of influence. Kind of a douchey thing to do, don't get me wrong. And their justification for doing this is they need more resources. The same thing that the old empire said. So the old empire cannot say anything about Russia doing this because they did the exact same thing in Central Asia. But after they invade them a little bit, they stop. And this is kind of confusing for the world. Remember, the world is, full of satellites now. I say a lot in these videos. It's like one of those weird speech things that I do sometimes. It's changed a lot. I used to say like other things repetitively a lot, but now it's and it's weird because you guys don't know. Sometimes you don't know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to stop, I swear. But like I said, the Russians are going to go ahead and they're going to invade and they're going to slowly stop. The whole world sees this because of satellites, and they're kind of confused as to why Russia just stopped. But all of a sudden, there's a flash in the sky, and a nuclear bomb is dropped on one of the major cities of the Cyan team. This is the first nuclear bomb ever used in war, and this city is devastated and it is completely wiped off of the map. All the people living there were not given a warning that this nuke was coming. In World War II, in real life, the US did drop pamphlets over Nagasaki and Hiroshima, letting people know that the nuke was coming. Russia did not do this here. It's a humanitarian crisis, and the whole international community is devastated by what Russia just did to this country. Like I said, the city is wiped off the map completely, and everybody there is dead. The Cyan country will cry out for help. Nobody's going to come to their help though, because Russia just showed that they are willing to use their nuclear weapons in war. Of course, in doing so, they have to go down. They now have 9 nuclear weapons in their arsenal, but that, as we know, is going to increase soon. But the Cyan country is going to surrender over to Russia, and in a peace deal, they get fully annexed. No. And in a peace deal, they get fully annexed. Russia just expanded its territory in a very bad way. They showed that they are willing to and capable of using their nuclear weapons in war, and this very much troubles the old empire, and of course the brown team as well, because now they know what exactly these nuclear bombs do to people, what they do to cities, and how they affect countries. So now we have a green dot on the map showing the radiation zone. But like I said, the international community is just terrified now of the capability of nuclear bombs, and everybody knows what they can do now. And does this stop the arms race between the old empire and the Russians? No, it does not. In fact, it might even make it worse. Both the old empire and the Chinese, not together, this is not like a joint declaration, but they will both call out the Russians, saying that was a horrible thing to do. What is wrong with you? And the Russians will just brush it off as whatever. This worsens relations between the square and the cross teams, as well as the cross team and the circle team, which, by the way, isn't a military alliance, it's an economical alliance, but these guys are all very close. But with Russia's nuclear development, some countries in its influence are very worried, because Russia just invaded a country in their influence. You guys might be next. So out of fear, kind of similar to what Romania did in World War II, they joined the Axis because they didn't want to get killed by Russia, even though they ended up getting killed by Russia anyway. But out of fear for their life, we have the brown team joining up with the cross alliance, and the blue team is kind of being pushed to do so as well. But they're going to chill out for a little bit. But I need to talk about some kind of very interesting dynamic that's happening over here. Remember, Central Asia used to be very hostile with each other. There's a lot of hate in this region, but because of the emergence of the Cold War, that hate has gone away and instead has been deflected and directed at the old empire. Russia has presented itself as kind of like a protectorate of this area, and they're like, chill out on each other because I'll just protect you from the old empire. The old empire is going to get you eventually. So how about you just stop hating each other, hate them instead, and let me protect you? That's kind of what's happening here. Sure, there might be still like some hostility between them in terms of politics, but when it comes to the grand scheme of things and the outlook on the international world, it's a lot more peaceful. The old empire does not like this because they can no longer take advantage of such hate. But now we are going to shift our focus to the Western Hemisphere and take a look at North America, because now we have another proxy war starting up. We've already had one proxy war. It really wasn't a proxy war. It was kind of like a shallow proxy war, between the African Union. But now we're having a real proxy war over here in America, specifically in Mexico. As you guys probably remember, or maybe you don't, I'm going to remind you anyway, there was a militant group that broke away from Texas and kind of became like a rogue terrorist state. I might have said that they weren't doing terroristic things before, but now they are, and I can't tell you why. They hate Mexico because of course, the war. They hate their own government because they abandoned them, and they have been doing really bad things to the Yellow Team. They've been targeting politicians, trying to do assassination attempts, some of which have been successful. They've been blowing up buildings, they've been killing civilians, it's not good, and the Yellow Team is struggling immensely to stop them. This has gotten so bad that it's starting to spill over into the Red Team, and this group is no longer just targeting the Yellow Team, they're targeting everybody because it's just become their nature. This terroristic group is pulling off operations in the Red Team now, and it's causing ruckus in the international community, and these countries are crying out for help. They need to get this group out, but they're just not strong enough to do it themselves because these guys are being foreignly funded by an anonymous country. And I'll let you guys theorize about that, but I'm not going to tell you who it is, and you probably will never know who it is. But eventually some countries will come to their help, specifically the Square Team. They're going to come to the aid of the Mexican country, the Yellow one. The Square Team will send peacekeeping forces to the Yellow Team in order to protect them. They're going to try their best to help them, and eventually they do start pushing back this militant group, although terroristic attacks are getting worse. And in fact, these guys are starting to go international. Whoever's funding them is very strong, obviously. And some terroristic attacks are happening in Texas now, which of course was the host country of these guys. They're happening all the way into Central America and South America, and something even happens over here in the old empire, which is part of the reason they joined in. Eventually, though, the Square Team's help starts to diminish, and this group starts to push back. The peacekeeping forces are kind of useless because they're not actual military forces. They aren't a part of the military of the Square Team. And this group starts to push into the Yellow Team, which is something that they didn't do before, but they're starting to threaten major cities, specifically these two. They're making pushes towards it, and eventually other parts of this country start to break away. Not break away, but other militant groups start to pop up and kind of like join in on this terroristic organization, and it gets really bad, and eventually these two major cities are in trouble because they are completely surrounded by this territory. This group also starts to spread into the Red Team, and the Square Team is not helping out the Red Team. Let's make that very clear because that's kind of important. They're receiving no help from the Square Team here, and that makes them kind of mad. So as this terroristic group starts to do more and more, they also enter into Texas, and this is what's going to fuel our proxy war. The Cross Alliance, as well as China, calls out the Square Team of the old empire, saying, you guys are not doing a good job. People are dying, and you're just not doing good. Now, the Yellow Team here is kind of like, yo, chill out on my homie. They're at least trying to help, but they become aligned with the Square Team, and this is where things are going to hit the fan because the Red Team is going to get assistance from China. China will also send their forces / peacekeeping forces in order to try to kick out this militant group. So we have the Square Team here, and we have China here. Texas, where are they going to get help from? Well, they're going to get help from Russia, of course. Russia starts to send their peacekeeping forces to Texas, and now we have very bad infringement because the Texas country is successful in kicking out the militant groups. However, they continue into the territory of the Yellow Team, and the Yellow Team is not happy about this because remember, these two do not like each other. They had a whole war, and of course Texas won that war, but now that they're kind of going back into their territory and trying to wipe out these groups, they are feeling like they're getting their sovereignty infringed because they are, and the Yellow Team is going to declare war on Texas. The old empire is like, whoa, and whoa, because that is not good. That is going to cause tensions between them and Russia, and they don't want that right now because Russia just nuked this country, and Russia might be a little bit rogue. The old empire just really isn't sure right now. But now these two are in full-fledged war. The old empire and their allies, including America, do not like that because, hey, you can't win this war. You're not going to win. Texas is, first of all, stronger than you, and second of all, you are fighting a group that is beating you. If you can't beat a terrorist group, you're not going to beat a full-on country. And if Russia chooses to send their military over to you, it is over, and we might get dragged into this. So what do we do to help you? And the Yellow Team is like, oh, I understand why I messed up now. The moment of realization for this country is not good. They're going to learn a hard lesson. Texas starts to send their troops in almost immediately, kind of like they were waiting for this. And it's all going dandy, you know, they're just fighting a war against each other while also kicking terrorist ass. Based. But it gets really bad when the peacekeeping forces of the Square Team get killed by the Texans, and now the Square Team is required to respond. Our forces just got killed in foreign territory. We have to get involved in this war now. We have to send our forces there to stop Texas from infringing on our troops anymore and to protect the yellow team from them. So now the square team is directly involved in this proxy war, and I'm sure Russia will respond by sending their forces over to Texas. Now, as for China, what are they going to do? They're going to do the exact same thing, and they're going to invade into this terrorist territory and then also invade into the yellow team's territory. So now it's kind of like, hey, China's infringing on our territory and our troops. Now, they haven't killed any peacekeeping troops, but this will officially sever ties between them and China. The old empire and China, they didn't have relations before, but now they're going towards the hostile area. We know that the old empire in Russia became hostile recently. Now, old empire and China are hostile because China is infringing on their troops. So this proxy war is getting a little out of hand, and as China tries to get rid of this terrorist group, it only makes it worse, because now this group is becoming more and more popular because these foreign invaders here, the governments are allowing them to be here. And when I say foreign invaders, I mean the peacekeeping troops / the personnel from the three strongest countries. The people of Mexico, including the yellow one and the red one, are not happy about this. So these terroristic groups become stronger and they become more apparent, and it's getting worse. The terrorist group achieves victory in capturing one of the yellow team's cities, and the same thing is said down here in the red country as one falls. Now they are becoming stronger and stronger as the people of this territory start to rise up and support this terrorist group. That is not a good thing. And when your people start, supporting terrorist groups over their own government, you did something wrong. And war breaks out between the red country and the yellow country as well. So now this whole thing is just going completely a mess. And kind of like what the Texans did to the Mexicans, the southern Mexicans are going to do much of the same. They are just going to start obliterating the yellow team. And eventually they meet up with Texan territory, not before killing a few square team personnel. It gets worse. They also just killed Texan personnel. So now the red team and the Texas team are at war. These three countries are all in a three-way war. Each and every one of them are at war with each other. So Mexico is becoming a mess. There are 4 fronts here, the terrorists in the 3 sovereign countries, and the yellow team is getting it worse out of all of them. First of all, though, the red team, along with the Chinese, are successful in taking over a lot of this central area, recapturing the yellow team's major city, and wiping out any terrorist group in this area. That's cool and all. They also wipe out the Texan troops in this area. Texas is mad about that. So Texas will blitz around the yellow team's coast, going straight towards the red team and invading into their territory, which they just stole from the yellow team, but getting closer to their actual province territory. Alright, cool. What's the yellow team doing? Well, they've completely given up on the eastern front and are focusing in on the western front, where they are actually beating back the Texans. Remember, they are now receiving troops from the square team. Alright, cool. They capture a major city. That's all dandy and all, and they've retaken a lot of their claims in this area. Oh, but Texas is spearheading towards your capital city. That is stopped, though. It stops because the square team stops them. Their troops are here now. There are now active Russian troops, active old Imperial troops, and active Chinese troops in these territories. They are all fighting against each other. However, it is important to note that these 3 countries are not at war with each other. There is no direct conflict on their borders. They are fighting overseas in foreign territory / foreign land. I told you this was going to get crazy, and I told you that it was going to hit the fan. It has hit the fan. It is very bad. Alright, so the terrorist group is obviously losing steam. They are being pushed back by the Chinese forces down here in the south, which is where they are most prominent. Oh, but they just popped up over here in Baja California, and they take the whole freaking thing. Yeah, Baja California was never very cemented as a part of the yellow team, and that's because they kind of should have been their own country, but they just weren't. They were just grouped together with Mexico. They definitely don't want to be a part of Texas, and they definitely don't want to be a part of Mexico, so this terrorist group over here is welcomed with open arms. Hey, form us a government, please, and we will make you that government. And that's horrible, because once again, they are a terrorist group. But it happens with open arms, and this group takes over all of Baja California and starts pushing up into Texas. And you really start to wonder who exactly is funding these terrorists. They are very, very freaking strong. But maybe not, because they just lost all their steam over here in the east. Not before enlarging this group, though, as they take over the red team's claims over here and push over and take all of the yellow team's claims over here. Alright, so the yellow team is very small, and they are just holding out for the square team, and eventually they're going to start to ask for direct involvement in this. They want America to join in. They're like, please invade Texas and knock them out of the war, but America cannot do that. Why can it not do that? Because doing so would start World War III. And what do we know about World War III? This will be used. Nobody wants to start World War III because they know exactly what will happen. There will be probably 22 nukes dropped and millions will die. The brown team could also get involved too. I'm not sure why they would or how they would, but that could equal up to about 26 nukes. And we don't even know if there are secret nuclear powers around the world. There's not. but we don't know that. They don't know that. So America will decline the yellow team's request to join the war. Okay, so instead the yellow team will start to utilize the forces provided to them. So they will use the old Imperial troops to push back the Texans in this area while completely giving up in the south and abandoning it, which leads to this terrorist group getting a lot of land. It also leads to the red team getting some land, as well as obviously and most prominently Texas. The yellow team is barely holding on, only having 2 major cities, one being their capital, but they start to be smart with their strategy. They're going to kind of, alleviate some of the tension and pain over here and start to retake some of these islands that they lost, and then they're going to start to push over this way because the Texan capital is this way, and if we can capture that, we might be able to, knock them out of the war. Okay, that's cool and all, but there's an issue. We're being attacked from the south by the terrorist group. That's not really an issue though, because hey, the red team just pushed into this area and knocked them out. But it still is an issue because we're at war with the red team. They're going to continue up north, but not before Texas splits this whole thing in half, separating these troops, leading to the yellow team killing them. All right, Texas just helped the yellow team, sort of. Oh, but not really, because they're going to push back over here. Oh, also the red team, you're going to get pushed back over here, but not before the red team pushes back against the terrorist group. Confusing, isn't it? It's a big old mess, and this West Pacific country is going to be like, you guys are freaking crazy. What is wrong with you? Everyone looks at them like, bro, what? Who are you? And they feel very embarrassed, and then they choose to sink into the ocean. You thought I wasn't going to include that into this series. Of course I will. It's an AdizzPro classic. So the West Pacific country will sink into the ocean, and now there is a giant lake on this map. This, of course, is going to have huge political effects in this series. So we'll see how this affects. But hey, these guys have access to the Pacific Ocean now. Very cool. Anyway, down here, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to sink a whole freaking country into the ocean. I'm not that dumb. All right, the yellow team is centralizing their forces. They're centralizing their defense, and they're holding out against these 2, actually 3. Whereas the red team is seeing increased support from China, leading to them actually wiping out the terrorist group in mainland Mexico and kind of keeping them over here. All right, cool. So now we can just focus on each other, right? Actually, yes. The red team will push up into Texas, capturing one of these major cities. Not before the yellow team starts to push into them, though. And also not before Texas pushes into the yellow team, taking one of their important major cities. Also pushing into the terrorist group. Okay, resources are obviously being exhausted here. And it is especially hard for the square team to supply the yellow team because they are on the other side of the ocean. If they had access over here to the Atlantic, it's no issue because they can just, send stuff straight from Louisiana right into there. But they're in the Pacific, which means they have to go through the Panama Canal and over around. For China, they are easily able to supply these guys. Same thing for Russia because of Siberia. Oh, wait, actually, no. Actually, no. It still is fine because they can just go through the Gulf of Mexico and into Texas. The square team is struggling to support these guys, and eventually they will make the call to abandon them. Bro, for real? And that was their last words. After the last of the square team troops are out, these guys are subject to just complete, I can't say what I want to say, but the ending looks something like this. The yellow team is gone, and now it is a 3-way war between the terrorists, the Texans, and the southern Mexicans, which at this point are actually just the Mexicans because the actual Mexicans are gone. So who can outclass each other, the Russians or the Chinese? This will, of course, make their relations even worse, because the old empires left the war, it's whatever. But now, Russia and China's relations are going to worsen because they remain in the war. And on top of that, the terrorist group is once again growing in this area, and mostly it's the people of the yellow team who are like kind of giving into them and allowing them to just control this area. The terrorists are being supplied by, once again, a foreign power who we will not name. Once again, let me know who you think that foreign power is in the comments. I'm really interested to see. But this group is causing a lot of issues, and they are starting to pop up once again in the red team, and China is freaking sick of it. China's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to sit down with the terrorists. We're going to negotiate with terrorists. And the terrorist group is actually okay with this. Obviously, they can achieve sovereignty, and they can actually become a state if they, work with and negotiate with a world power. Not just any world power, though, the second strongest country in the world. So this group will take them up on that offer, and this kind of leaves like this cross team and the Texans a little confused as to what to do because they want to keep fighting them. But there's a chance that if they go too far with it, that the Chinese get mad at them, and that could raise tensions. If the Chinese give this terrorist group sovereignty and then Russia goes ahead and gets rid of that sovereignty, that kind of, gives China justification to retaliate in a way. Russia does not want China to retaliate because that would be bad. So what Russia is going to do is that they're going to pull out of Texas. They're going to leave Texas. They see how this could end badly, and they're like, we're out. Peace. Goodbye. And this will not be the same as Mexico because Mexico, they just got crushed because they were already weak and they were only existing because of the old empire. Texas is stronger than that though. They're able to last without the help of foreign powers. And what Texas is going to decide to do here is that they're going to decide to draw up a ceasefire with the terrorist group as well as the red team. So they're not going to agree to a fundamental peace treaty, but they'll agree to a ceasefire, and they're going to also agree to some boundaries / borders. So let's see what that entails in a peace treaty. All right. Here we have before, and here we have after, almost. I need to do some explaining first. So we'll start with the peace deal between the Texans and the Mexicans. The red team will take this land, and the Texans will take all of this land. They also take this land over here, and this land right here. Oh, and this, of course. Why did that not color in? Anyway, now we're left with this mess. You're probably wondering what exactly is happening here. Well, the terrorist group, they did get sovereignty, but in a very broken way. Certain groups were granted sovereignty, not the whole state as a whole. So it's very weird, kind of, these little exclaves and enclaves everywhere. But this group will take control of the capital city of the former Mexican country, and that's pretty huge because that's a lot of population that they just had. They'll also take over all of Baja California, this land from the Texas country, and then of course, like I said, all of the little enclaves over here, as well as the territory that they've been holding on to for a very long time now. This is it. This is what the ceasefire entails. A complete mess in Mexico. And this region will continue to heat up and get hostile with each other, specifically at this point right here. This vantage point right here could start a world war. In fact, that might be what starts it. Just kidding. I actually don't have any plans for World War III just yet. We're not there. And I don't know when we'll be there. And I don't even know if this Cold War will lead to World War III, but yeah, I just don't know. I don't have it planned out that far yet. Let me know what you think. Maybe I'll use your input. Wink, wink. Anyway, following the end of this proxy war, we have a few obvious moves happening. First of all, Texas joins in on the Cross Alliance. This is huge because this is another border that the two enemies share. The Square team and the Cross team. They now border each other in America. And oh, this is so much worse than it looks because remember, America and Texas hate each other. They fought a war against each other. Texas used to be a part of America, then they broke away and they kicked America's ass, and America is salty about it. Actually, America got jumped, but still, they're mad about it. But these guys joining the Cross team is very important, and well, I think it's pretty obvious what happens here. Mexico would join in on the Circle Alliance, which is the Chinese alliance, but what do you notice here? What do you notice about this circle? It's yellow. China just officially converted its economical alliance into a military alliance. It was already kind of low-key a military alliance. Now it's official. It's a military alliance. The red team and the orange team are both okay with it, but guess who's not okay with it? Australia. They're not okay with it. They're going to attempt to leave the Circle Alliance, and China's like, you cannot do that. Part of the deal was that you stay in our alliance, and China's mad about it. But they're not going to do anything about it because it's not huge enough for them to do anything. It's whatever at the end of the day. They're not going to send troops down here to invade this country because what do they get out of that? This country will peacefully exit the Circle Alliance because they don't want any of this smoke. They are safe over here in Australia and they do not want to get drawn in to whatever is brewing in Asia. So they leave and they were replaced by Mexico. Now, what do you notice here? 1, 2, and 3 different alliances. Tripolar system. Extremely dangerous. It's the worst kind of system. Guess who just produced their first nuclear weapon? China did. And the world finds out about this because of satellite, and the world is like, bro, you said that you were not gonna, and China's like, yeah, I know. And their allies are like, bro. And they're like, yeah, I know, but hey, welcome to the tripolar system. We need to be ready. China becomes a nuclear power, and they are now officially a superpower. They were already sort of a superpower, just kind of like a sidestep of it because they didn't have nuclear bombs. A true superpower has nuclear bombs, and they weren't a true superpower. They were just kind of like a low-key superpower. Now that they have nuclear bombs, they are truly a superpower, meaning that there are 3 superpowers in this world, making that tripolar system even worse. It gets even worse. It's bad. It's very hot right now. These guys, they're not super close to going to war with each other, but it could happen at the snap of a finger. And even if, like, the Cross team and the Square team went to war, China would get drawn into it because it would be impossible not to. So yeah, there's 27 nuclear bombs in the world right now. That's fun. That's not enough to, get rid of humanity, but we can only imagine what this is going to look like. But do we know that all 13 of these nukes are in Square team territory? Like, could they be in Norway? Kind of taking a step back from all these hostile continents, we're going to be heading down to peaceful old South America, where we have a country actually splitting into 2. The yellow country, born of Lime team descendants. It's definitely done nothing. I can say that much. But politically, it isn't doing too hot right now, as is with a lot of countries in this series for some reason. But basically, they have a movement within to separate the North from the South. Now, why do they want to separate the North from the South? Because of different needs. You know, up here, the North has different needs than the South, and the government is not doing a good job at just, you know, satisfying both of the northern and southern regions' needs. This is something that can happen when you have kind of like a dysfunctional slash a government that was kind of set up poorly. This country took a lot of structure in their government from the Lime team, and as we know, the Lime team doesn't exist anymore, so yeah, obviously that's not good structure. But instead of trying to fix the problem, the government will agree to peacefully split. This country is huge. It was never very successful because of just, once again, the needs of both the North and the South being too different. So yeah, let's take a look at how exactly they split. And this is a peaceful split, by the way. This is not like a warlike split. Both sides agree to this. The president, or the, I guess the leaders of this country, they're like, yo, we're good with this. All right, and this is what the split looks like. So like I said, just right down the middle, the North and the South separate peacefully. But you might notice that this capital city is still in part of the red team. That's because the red team is actually the yellow team here. The government kind of... Okay, so when the government split, the southern country kind of kept the name of the country, and then this northern country is kind of considered like the new one, but it was a peaceful split. These guys just kept the same name, and they also keep the same capital, so that's why it's kind of like looking like this. Anyway, we're actually gonna go ahead and just head straight up north over here to the purple and dark blue countries, because these guys are also going to be doing something. But instead of splitting, we have the exact opposite, because the dark blue country will be joining up with the purple country due to, well, look where they're located, you know, the Amazon rainforest. They're very impoverished. They can't function because they don't have any coastal area. So these guys are just going to go ahead and join up with another country. And they had a choice between the Peruvian one and the Brazilian one, but they ended up choosing the Brazilian one. And that was probably the smart thing to do because these guys have been here for a while. Now you might be wondering, why am I making it blue? Because the blue looks better than the purple on the map. Let me zoom out real quick. Yeah, that looks better than purple. So we're going to be keeping this thing dark blue, even though that the government is still the purple team. I do this sometimes when I don't like the color meshing. Like another purple country here would just look kind of weird. I think we need a darker color in South America, so we're here with this. Remember though, it's the dark purple team that's been here for a while, not the blue team that is ruling. And by the way, I'm leaving tomorrow morning, Monday morning. My plans kind of changed. I ended up staying here an extra day at home, and I had to record 4 videos today, which is Sunday. So yeah, I'm gonna record 2 right now, being this one and Wednesday's video, and then I'm going to go out and do stuff with my friends and stuff. And then I'm gonna come back and do the last 2 What If Civilization Started Over videos. I didn't get to record any videos last night, which was Saturday night for me, because I was tired. I finally caught up on sleep. But yeah, you guys are here for Civilization. Let's go ahead and get back to that. But yeah, you guys are here for Civilization, so let's get back to that. You guys don't care about what happened like almost a month ago when you're seeing this, right? All right, now we get back to the fun Cold War stuff. We took a little bit of a vacation in South America. Nothing eventful happened here, but still it's nice to get away from the impending doom that is the Cold War. But you might have noticed that I have the nuclear bombs layer on right now. You might be wondering, why am I doing that? Usually all I have is the capitals layer on. This one, I can show capital cities. You also might notice that I have the alliance layer on. Well, that's because both nukes and alliances are super important right now, because guess who just discovered that there are nuclear bombs stationed in Norway? Russia did. The old empire has 3 nuclear bombs on bomber planes ready to deploy whenever, stationed in Norway, and Norway is right next to Russian territory. Now, I mean, of course, the old empire is right next to Russian territory. They border each other, but Norway, strategically, that can be a lot bigger for them, because if they were to try to take out all the old empire's nuclear bombs over here, there's 3 more waiting for them in Norway, so that's something they have to game plan for. And this isn't like the Cuban Missile Crisis in the sense that they can be launched. Remember, we're not exactly there yet in terms of what you can do with nuclear bombs. They're still being deployed from planes, but trust me, there is definitely technology being developed right now that allows you to shoot them out of missiles. So Russia discovers the 3 nukes in Norway, and they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. And the whole world is like, whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa. Russia sends threats to the old empire, they send threats to Norway, and they're like, you guys are escalating this way too much, you don't have to do that. You know, we don't have nukes in other territory, right? So why are you putting nukes in other territory? And the old empire is like, because we can. Norway is one of our closest allies. We only have nukes in Norway, and they're for defensive purposes only. They're not going to be used offensively, so you can calm down a little bit, and Russia is not having any of it. They're flipping out. Russia starts to mass produce nuclear weapons. Remember, These guys, they've started to ramp up production of nukes. Obviously, we're at 13 nukes in the old empire, we're at 9 in Russia, and the last episode was a lot less than that. But Russia starts to rapidly arm up on nuclear bombs, and when your enemy starts to do it, you have to do it too. So now the old empire starts to ramp up their nuclear bomb production, and we're going to start getting into the 20s and 30s very soon. But remember, we're in a tripolar system. China is also going to start to ramp up their nuclear bomb production. Right now, they only have one, and they are also the newest nuclear power in the world. But once you have one bomb, it's only a matter of time until you have hundreds of thousands of them. Not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds of them. And the world is holding its breath once again because the nuclear powers are starting to rapidly produce. The brown team's like, hey, we just had these for protection. We're not going to, do what they're doing. So the brown team's not going to start rapidly production because they're not enemies. Well, they're not close with them, or they're not neutral. They have a slight dislike towards the square team and the Russians, but they're not enemies, so they're not going to start ramping up their nuclear bombs. They might produce a few more just because, but I don't think they're going to start getting into the 10s and the 20s. These guys, though, they're going to go ham. So not much happens for a little bit because these countries are so focused on making bombs, but we head down to South Africa now, where this country is going to also fracture. A lot of fracturing and unifying happening in this video, but that's kind of the effect of decolonization. When you have these foreign powers who come into a continent, mess everything up, and then leave very sloppily, this is what happens. So this country is kind of an interesting one, actually, because remember, when a lot of these powers, they decolonized, they left big chunks of land. The brown team left their entire North American colony under one, and we saw how that ended up, very bad. It led to a proxy war. This country was left alone. It actually was pretty successful for a little bit. They were able to govern themselves very well, and I do believe this was the brown team's colony. But they were able to govern well, and they didn't face any threat of fracture like all of their other former colony buddies, colonized peoples did. That has changed, though. With the development of whatever's happening up here, different groups within are having different opinions, and those different opinions have gone from an international stage to a national stage. So all of their worries and differing opinions internationally has kind of come back to hit them nationally, and they now have domestic issues which were not talked about or even a problem before. And just like that, there's an independence movement here and there, and eventually the country is like, all right, well, we were able to hold it together for a very long time, but I think it's time that we split ways. This was always my plan with this country. This isn't me just trying to make up stuff. But I think now's the time. I think they've been around for a little too long. On my timeline. For you guys' timeline, it might be different. Let's see how exactly the government wants to split up, because there's no provinces down here. That's my fault, though. That has nothing to do with the country. Alright, so first of all, there is a large movement in the south that wants to join up with the light blue country down here. This country is actually pretty rich from all of the trade that happened going around Africa. Of course, now there's more than likely a Suez Canal that the old empire constructed, so instead of having to go around Africa, you can just go through there to get to Asia. So they used to be very rich, and I'd imagine that now that the Suez Canal is here, they are experiencing a lot less richness, but that doesn't change the fact that historically they had a lot of money, and I'm sure they've found ways to kind of maintain that status. So it's a strong country, they have pretty average military, pretty good economy. It's a place you want to be, a lot better than this place. So a lot of the surrounding areas around it want to join. And that's exactly what the government grants them, because we don't want to fight a war, and we definitely don't want to get these guys involved because they would beat us in a war and would probably take more land than we're about to give them. Alright, so in this little treaty here, this is what the land exchange looks like. The light blue team gets this much land, and they will throw a little bit of money at the central government over here, but at the end of the day, both sides are happy. We get rid of the people with unrest, and we got some money for it, so nice. Alright, so now what else do we have to divide up? Here's this little cluster of provinces down here. They want their independence, so they shall get it. We have a yellow group here. They want their independence. They will get it. A little bit of orange over here, and so far, the breakup is going very smoothly and exactly as planned. The yellow team over here will get some land, and then we finally have a big one. The dark blue country here in the center gets its independence, and from here, the government is like, okay, we've given up a lot of land here, and a lot of it is near the borders of all these other countries, so obviously we're not doing a good enough job. How about instead of just giving all these little regional provinces their independence, we just split into two? It allows us to watch closely over the provinces that we have within our borders, and it allows the other country, which we'll split with, to do the exact same thing. So let's just do that and see if it works, and they will split into two countries, something like this. So now the kind of, what is this, peach, beige, they have gone ahead and they've split up their territory successfully, Everyone at the end of the day is happy, and they've split into two, and they will now just kind of chill out for a little bit and focus on themselves. Nothing wrong with that. As for these other countries and their capital cities, the pink one will make theirs over here, the dark blue one right here. This orange one only has one major city, so that shall be their capital. Same with the gold team, and then the green team will make this one their capital. Cool, new countries. I'm sure they won't get taken advantage of by the international community, but we'll see if that actually happens later on. For now, we have to head back up north, and that's because Russia has just recruited a new ally. The West African country joins in on the Cross Alliance, and this is huge because they have their first big player outside of themselves. You know, the Central Asian countries, they're nice to have and all, but they're not very strong. Russia was kind of like a lone wolf. They then added Texas, which is, you know, they're slightly stronger than the Central Asian countries, but they're in the middle of a rebuild right now, and they have terrorists on their borders, so I'm not too sure how useful they would be. But now we have West Africa. Now, don't get me wrong, West Africa is also going through a rebuild, but they have a lot of influence, and they're also on a way better track than Texas is currently. They're more historic, they have a lot more population, and their economy is on the rise following the end of, the split with the actual African Union, or the Mediterranean African Union. Gotta remember, these guys have new names now. Okay, cool. The old empire isn't happy about that. They're like, yo, we didn't add any new allies. Why did you add a new ally? And Russia's like, well, we don't have to get your permission to add a new ally, first of all, so back up. And second of all, there's no rules, once again, so what are you even saying? The old empire's like, I bet. We'll check up and see what they do later on. But then they go over to the Mediterranean African country, and they're like, yo, do you want to join the Square Team Alliance? And they are like, no. We're good. They're a little bit scarred. That little civil war that they had obviously did a lot of damage to the world. It ended up, you know, making the Cold War a lot more serious, and they lost. That's big. So they don't want to get dragged back into any international affairs. They are actually praised by the West African country for this. They're like, yo, that's good. Good job, you. I don't want to have to fight you anyway because we would have won, and I wouldn't want to see you cry. Except they probably would, because I think they might still be a little salty about that little civil war, even though they won. But Russia's main justification for this, even though once again they don't really need a justification, is that the old empire put nukes in Norway. So they're like, yo, if you're gonna do that, then we're gonna get these guys on our team, because why do you have nukes in Norway again? And the old empire's like, defense. The Norwegian government, by the way, is completely silent about this. They haven't said anything. Like, they don't either claim or deny that there are nukes there. They're just kind of looking at the old empire like, good luck. But I want to go ahead and reiterate how serious that the nukes in Norway are. Russia is still furious about this. There has been no cooldown at all. In fact, it's still rising, and Russia has now just put out a public statement saying that they are going to retaliate to the nukes in Norway. What does retaliate mean? The old empire is like, well, you're gonna do what? China's like, you're gonna do what? India's like, you're gonna do what? The whole world is like, you're gonna what? Russia doubles down and said, we're going to retaliate to your nukes in Norway. Does that mean nuclear war? Does that mean World War III? What does that mean? The old empire will respond to Russia saying that they are ready and capable for direct conventional conflict with Russia. Tensions? Up. War? This close. The whole world is sounding the red alarm like that right now, like, whoa, it's about to go down. We need to hunker down. There's about to be a nuclear exchange between the old empire and Russia. Everyone's flipping out. China's like, whoa. They call for de-escalation, and reiterate to both countries, both the old empire and Russia, like, hey, if you guys go to nuclear war, you know that like that can low-key end the world. And they both kind of look at China in unison like, get out. Eventually, troops are moved to the border between Russia and the old empire, and there is a standoff along this stretch of land. Troops aim guns at each other, tanks roll up, you know, Air Force on standby, Navy. I'm not too sure what's happening in the Black Sea, but I don't think Russia's doing anything because the old empire owns this thing. But everyone is ready. The militaries are waiting for an order from the presidents. And once again, the whole world is sounding the red alarm like now, like it's going to go down. We need to hunker down. You know, these other allies, they start getting ready. China doesn't really get ready because they aren't directly involved in this little escalation. But, you know, like the Iberian team, the West African team, Norway, everyone in the cross and square teams gets ready. India will make a statement. And once again, India is a very neutral country, so this is kind of surprising to everybody, but they're like, stop, slow down, stop. You know, we don't care that you hate each other, but we care about our people and we care about the people of the world. So how about we don't nuke each other into nothingness? The troop standoff lasts for about a week, but nothing ever comes of it. And eventually, both sides back down. They leave the border. They don't leave the border, but they back up a whole bunch. They're not standing across from each other, you know, ARs pointed. They're a few miles back. Well, maybe not a few miles, but like a mile back now. How about that? And the tensions start to cool down again, although there is no official government statement from either country talking about the other. And time will begin to move again. The world came this close to nuclear war, this close to World War III. but it never happened. In the next couple of weeks, we move over to Italy, where the purple team invades the lime team. Now the purple team, it's a very interesting one. I've talked about rogue countries before, and I said there really aren't any in the world, and there aren't, but the purple team is about as close to a rogue-like nation you can get. These guys have a claim over the entire Mediterranean Sea because, you know, they once had that in ancient times. The whole world is kind of looking at them like, bro, just let it go. They don't care though. They're determined to get their land back, and the lime team has some of it, so they will invade them. Now this lime Italian team here is a victim of World War II. Well, they're a perpetrator in World War II as well, but they were once in a union with this country here, known as the Italian Union, and that has since not gone well because they lost World War II and it was forced to break apart. Since then, they've struggled to get back on track economically, especially compared to their former union member. You know, I just noticed this right here. This purple is probably from like episode 12. Like you'll notice that there's these little spots around everywhere of like ancient countries that are no longer there. It even goes over here. Like I bet if I go over here to Iran, you can see like lime. Yep, you can see lime stuff. There's a lime island right here. You might even be able to see like some red over here. No, actually it looks like green. Oh, there's red right there. But like I said, you know, this program isn't too amazing at like catching these little tiny little pixels around the black lines. Like we can see the blue team here. That doesn't mean they're actually there. It's just a mapping error. But yeah, back over here, the purple team is way stronger than the lime team, and eventually the lime team will just straight up surrender over to them, even without losing their capital. That's how like down bad they were. So let's take a look at what they do in this peace treaty. And unfortunately for the lime team, it's not a pretty one. The purple team will take this northern land, this central land, and this southern land, and as you'll see, the lime team is split into two, with them being in Rome, and then Corsica, and then them being up here near Switzerland. The purple team doesn't care though. They have ambitions, and their ambitions are to, once again, take back the Mediterranean Sea. But the lime team now being fractured is, they're gonna have to let this land go. But this land, it's not strong enough to really live on its own. It has no major city in it. This is in the blue team, by the way. It's like really close, but it's in the blue team. But no major cities. A whole bunch of mountains. So the lime team will be like, hey, you guys take it. Yeah. And you might realize that this is sort of a violation of the Treaty of World War II. They weren't allowed to unionize again, and even though this isn't unionizing, it still kind of is. So the old empire is going to be like, yo, you guys just broke the peace treaty, so we're going to have to retaliate unless you pay us a lot of money. So the lime team is forced into paying reparations for breaking the peace deal to the square team, which, you know, is the old empire. It's Norway, Iberia, and now America. Russia doesn't get that because they're not in the square team alliance anymore. The peace deal was very specific. It says you don't pay reparations to the old empire or Russia, you pay reparations to the square team. So Russia's a little mad about that. They're like, yo, we should get some money too. And the old empire's like, tensions are going to kind of start to rise again over this. And the whole world is like, bro, really? It's not that serious. But the lime team's paying reparations over to the old empire. Eventually, this is going to straight up bankrupt their economy, and they're going to full on collapse. Dang, that's tough. So following the collapse of the lime team, the old empire is actually going to go ahead and sit down with the purple team and divide it up between them two, which was a very nice thing of the old empire to do. They didn't have to do that, but the old empire will take these two southern provinces right here, and the purple team will get everything else. So on a map, it looks something like this. Now what about Corsica? Corsica, there was no provision here. The old empire, although they could use it, they don't necessarily want it. So even though the government of the lime team is gone, they kind of still reside over here in Corsica, but eventually the blue team will quote unquote invade Corsica and take it. The old empire is kind of suspicious about it because they don't kill anybody, and they're like, did you just unionize again? But no, they didn't. So it's whatever, you know, we'll let that one slide. It's just Corsica. Now we head back up over here to this region. This region has been pretty hot recently. Oh, Russia's invading Sweden. Is this what they meant by retaliation? After making a naval landing, and eventually Sweden is going to fall over to Russia, they will be annexed by Russia, and now all of a sudden Norway has a new border with one of their top enemies. Norway questions Russia, saying, why did you do that? And we're gonna retaliate too. Because remember, Russia said that when they found nukes in Norway, they're like, this is like bad, and we're gonna retaliate. You know, you're not gonna get away with this. And what they meant by that is, first of all, they added the West African country to their alliance, and second of all, they were gonna get right up on the border of Norway. And that's kind of like an intimidation factor, if I had to guess. So they're trying to intimidate Norway and kind of force them into maybe not having nukes there. But Norway didn't take that too likely, and like I said, they have troops on these borders and they are ready to go, and we have another standoff happening with Norwegian troops pointing guns at Russian troops and vice versa. Norway says it's ready to throw hands, and so does Russia. And the world is once again looking at this like, please don't. Nuclear map, let's take a look at that. There's 4 nuclear powers. The old empire has the most with 13, then Russia with 9, and then the brown team with 4, and China with only 1. But hey, you know, these 2 nukes, 22 of them, that might be enough to really do some damage. There's about 3, maybe 4 nukes in Norway. Who knows where Russia has their nukes at? The world will once again cause for a, a seizement of this, like, hey, stop. And slowly but surely over time, both forces will back down, and this will once again kind of mellow out and everything will go back to normal. Now, when I say normal, I don't mean like there's no tensions, because tensions are still very high. They're boiling over, but not to the point where there's going to be nuclear war. That was kind of our second Cuban Missile Crisis. The first one was a lot worse because the old empire was directly involved with it. It was between number 1 and number 3. This one was between number 3 and number 15 or something. Maybe number 10. So it was slightly less serious, but it was still serious enough to where, a lot of people would die. But another thing that we talked about in the last episode was the mass production of nuclear weapons happening. Yeah, that has been happening. It's been happening since about the midway point of the last episode up until this one. So it's about time that we update these numbers. 13 nukes. That's a joke. They now have 28 nuclear bombs in their arsenal. Now, what about Russia? They have 9. 27 nuclear bombs in their arsenal. Well, they've added 3, so they're now at 7. And as for China, they were now at 8. So China has surpassed the brown team in terms of nuclear bombs. And there are a total of 70 nuclear weapons in the world that are deployable and can be used in a war. That's kind of terrifying. I'm not sure what the exact number is needed to end the world. Let's actually look it up real quick. How many nuclear bombs would it take to end the world? 400. So, we're a little under a quarter of the way there. Here are updated nuclear weapons, but I think we need to go a little bit more into detail because, the old empire has 28 nukes. But how many of them are actually in the old empire? Let's see where they have them across the map. So they have 28 nukes, that's their total. However, they have 5 that are on foreign grounds. 4 of them are in Norway. 1 of them is in Iberia. All right, now what about Russia? Well, we need to actually talk about Russia first, because guess who just discovered that there were nuclear bombs in West Africa? The old empire did. Well, actually, no, it wasn't. It was Iberia. Iberia sent a couple of spies into West Africa, normal Cold War stuff. And those spies are now dead. However, they're not dead before sending the intel over that there were approximately 5 nuclear bombs stationed in West Africa. Now, why would there be 5 nuclear bombs there? Well, the square team has 1 ally here. And then, of course, you have the Farmers Union and then the old empire over here. And you have Norway up here. So, having them in Africa gives you a lot of options. You can go up there, over here, over there. And you can even go over here if you have enough gas. But that's a pretty good staging ground. So, yes, Russia has 5 nuclear bombs here. So, we'll go ahead and put the 5 right next to the West African capital. And the 5 right next to Russia's 27. The brown team, they don't have nukes stationed anywhere else but their own territory. And the same thing for China. But now things, like I said, got a little bit more interesting. And to be honest with you, this would probably lead to the old empire putting more nukes in Iberia, but for now they're kind of chilling because, hey, Russia's kind of catching up to us in terms of nuclear numbers. They have 1 less than us. But the old empire is increasingly mad about the nukes that they just found in West Africa because they now have discovered that they were there before they joined the cross team. So Russia was putting things in the West African country before they were even their ally, which says a lot. It tells them that they were working together since before joining that alliance, obviously, but it also might tell them that Russia was aiding the West African country during the African Union Civil War. Now, if that's the case, the old empire might be in trouble because we saw West Africa absolutely handle the African Union, which is now the Mediterranean country. So maybe Russia is a little bit stronger than the old empire had thought. I mean, they are ranked number 3 in terms of military, so it's not too surprising, but they might be number 2. Maybe they'd give them a run for their money for number 1. Anyway, with all this catastrophe happening around them, the brown team wants to make a move. They feel like they're kind of out of speed and not up to date with the whole world. They used to be number 1 in the world, so they are feeling kind of left out. So what are they going to do? They're going to invade a country. And what country are they going to invade? They're going to invade this tiny little Swiss country right here. I'm not even going to color it in. You know how this would end. But the brown team takes out the Swiss country, and the world is really need to do that? These guys have been here for a little bit. They haven't really done anything. I don't think they've even said anything on the international stage. So why are we invading tiny little countries? And the world is just looking at the brown team like, bro, you're not really showing off your power there. You just killed a bunch of villagers or something like that. You're not that guy, pal. The brown team's embarrassed, and they probably won't do anything like that ever again. If they want to show off, they'd probably have to go to war with a country like France, or maybe they would have to invade the UK or that's really all their options. I guess you can go after these guys, but they were your ally not too long ago, so I don't think you can do that. You can also technically go after the red country. They used to be a part of you, but I'm not too sure how everyone would react to that, so maybe don't do that. But now we head over to the Pacific region, where Japan is going to throw hands with itself. Now remember, a few episodes ago here, there was a little bit of killing going on. You know, Japan attacks itself with the help of Japan. And these guys were going to go ahead and gear up for war with each other, and that time has come. So Japan declares war on Japan, and the invasion starts, with the blue Japan going after the south, and the white country, with the white Japan going after the south, or the north of the south. Yes, terms. This war is pretty equal. In fact, these countries are like right next to each other in terms of rankings, so it's fairly unsurprising that it's going back and forth as such. But eventually the blue team will start to get the upper hand and push back against the white team. The white team will push back over here in this section of the blue country, while the blue team pushes up over here and back into the front line. It's back and forth, but eventually the blue team will make a pretty significant thing here as they go out and around the capital of the white team, while also losing a pretty big chunk of land in the southern province. But it's okay though, because guess who just captured their capital city? Japan did. So Japan captures the capital of Japan, which isn't the end of the world or anything, but it's definitely something that you don't want to happen, because your government functioning is going to kind of decline. Blue Japan will take back all of the land that it has lost, and then it will continue on with their march against Japan, going up into northern territory until eventually Korea joins the war, and Korea starts to rapidly take land in the Hokkaido region, and these three provinces are now Korean, as well as these few islands right here. Eventually Korea will make a landing in northern Japan, working their way down the aisle until eventually the blue team is like, oh god. The blue team doesn't want smoke with Japan at all, so they're going to invade a little bit more and then eventually stop at these couple of provinces, and the rest is sent over to Korea. They meet each other, and the Koreans do not advance. Instead, they offer peace, and the blue team, the Koreans, and the white team will all sit down at the peace conference to figure out what they want to do next. And this is what they end up doing next. So Japan is split into two, like it already was, but now the Koreans are here. The blue team should have and could have gotten a lot more land. However, in an agreement with Korea, they offered up this deal to where they are going to get less land, meaning that Korea gets it instead, in exchange for Korea not invading them. Korea agrees with this because it really wasn't in their agenda to invade southern Japan, at least not right now. So Korea's okay with that, they make the agreement, and that is that. It's been years since Korea initially had left the continent, but they're back. Not continent, island. Or should I say archipelago. And the last time they left, it was unified for a little bit and then it fractured, and it hasn't been unified since, but this is as close to as it has gotten to being unified since Korea fully owned it. So that's something to watch, but for now, the blue team is the only Japanese country, and Korea has a little bit of land on the Isles. But now something just happened over here in Central Africa. Another country has collapsed, and this time it is the yellow team right here in the middle. For multiple reasons, including political instability, a pretty bad job of being divided up by colonial powers, and just a bunch of other economical issues, this country's government has collapsed, and the surrounding countries are going to have a field day going after it, but not before the old empire steps in like, hey, we're going to take all this for ourselves. So the old empire basically sends its armies into Central Africa before anyone else can, and they're like, this is what we're actually going to do. We're going to partition this up fairly and freely amongst each other, but I get a little bit more land than everyone else. The Africans, of course, have to kind of agree to this because it's the old empire. What are you going to do? Like, they're going to beat you up if you say no. But also, a lot of countries are kind of like, what is this guy doing? Like, is he trying to be nice? You're the old empire. You've done a lot of horrible things. Don't try to correct yourself now. That's kind of what it is. And also, you're like impeding on the world's ability to survive because of your nuclear bombs. But anyway, everyone has to go along with it, so let's see how they partition this thing up. Hopefully they do it right. Oh, they didn't do that right at all now, did they? Oh, that's bad. That's really bad. Okay, so as we figured, the old empire would probably getting the most amount of land, and they do. They cut right across, right towards Central Africa. Okay, big deal. The country that is next up to get the most amount of land is the gray team here, and I'm not too sure what the causes and implications of that are. Maybe they're trying to help them economically because they're in such a bad spot. But now we'll go over to the blue team here. They get the next biggest amount of land, and that's probably for a reason. You know, they're aligned with them. Now we see who gets the smallest amount of land. Oh, these guys. Yeah, they barely get anything. And that's probably because they're aligned with West Africa, who is aligned with, you guessed it, Russia. All right. The red team gets barely any land. They shared that huge border with them. Despite that, though, they only get this little Oklahoma looking thing. Okay, I mean, that happens, I guess. Now for these three, theirs are actually fair. You know, they get a pretty even amount of land amongst each other. That's pretty cool. But now we're left with this little thing in the middle here. Now what is this? Well, I'm glad you asked. After annexing their little bit of claim over here, the old empire is actually going to release a big chunk of it over to this little center thing here. They've just made themselves a nice little puppet state here in Central Africa. They'll give them a capital right about here. And the old empire expands its influence into Central Africa in probably an attempt to cut off the West African country from getting any more influence in this region, because now the old empire is right here and they're going to try to stop that from spreading. And they might have maybe possibly had something to do with the collapse of this Central African country right here. Maybe, probably, perhaps. And they maybe, probably, perhaps use that as a way to kind of gift these countries down here some land. So they're like, hey, the old empire gave us land. Like, that's pretty cool of them. Maybe we should like be aligned with them. You see where I'm going with this? All right, yeah, I think we kind of do. And to kind of back this up even more, they're going to be adding another country to their alliance. This time the square team will be adding an African country to their alliance. And that country is going to be none other than the Sudanese country, which they had just previously bought land from a couple episodes ago. These guys join up with the square team and are a proud member of such. And this gives them even more influence heading into Central Africa. So the old empire is kind of playing its cards in this region. Now, on the contrary, they kind of think that Russia's trying to get influence over Africa. They're really not. In fact, Russia's more focused on Europe and Asia. But the old empire, you know, even if that's not true, having these guys in Africa could be beneficial for their resources and manpower and all the other kind of, you know, crappy things that come with war. Basically, they're trying to use them. But now we go back to Russia. They're going to respond to this, because every action their op makes goes ahead and warrants a response. They're going to declare war on and invade the blue country. These guys have gone through a lot recently. Well, recently for me, probably a long time ago for you guys. But the Russians will start their invasion into the blue country. And, well, there's, as you guessed, probably little to no resistance. Yeah, the blue country is not very strong. Of course, they threw hands in the central regional area of Central Asia, and they look pretty weak. They're even weaker than that because, you know, those guys were not very strong countries in the first place. So yeah, eventually they're going to make their way all the way through, meet up with the border of the brown team, one of their allies, and this thing is gone. In the peace treaty, we see full annexation, and Russia grows even bigger. They're now kind of reaching over towards China, and China is going to take offense to this because, hey, why are you impeding on our area of influence? Remember, the crossroads of influence is right here in the brown country / the red country. Really, technically, it's like right here now because, you know, you have the square team. Technically, it's actually like right here because, you know, you have the square team right here, cross team right here, circle team right here. This is like the crossroad of influence. This is like ground zero, basically. They all meet right here. But the influences, it overlaps a little bit more than that. So just this general area, no bueno. China doesn't like that Russia's coming toward them in this way, and they're going to go ahead and recruit some countries into their alliance. And who do they recruit? Well, first of all, they recruit the gold country. And second of all, they recruit the orange country. Now, what do we know about the orange country? Well, they aren't too friendly with the red country, and that's because the red country, if you remember from a really long time ago, cut the brown country into two. Of course, itself, and then this thing. Now, over time, I'm sure these two grew in two different directions politically, so there probably isn't too much of a connection between them, but these guys are not friendly with the red team, and therefore they joined up with the Chinese. And yeah, this region, very dangerous. But that is actually going to do it for today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to show some support on it by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel if you're new. All the support is greatly appreciated. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. And of course, thank you to all our super fans. This includes Serminator, Augusto, King Cheese, a Norwegian, RS, Dale Martinez, Australian Geo Guy, America and Canada and UK, Zaylance, Lazo Does Nothing, Breezioid, Laser Taze, Nevada Garbage Trucks, Pablo Sigma Cat, Death Shredder X, Hammer Toad 45, CTG on YT, and DW Cool Dude. Once again, thank you guys.